All right, we are back from lunch, and we were going to tackle item number 16.
Item 16 is from the Planning Department to conduct a public hearing and adopt zoning ordinance amendment 2016-1099ZA to amend Chapter 17.66 accessory dwelling to remove the special permit requirement and to bring the requirements into conformance with state law, amend the definition for accessory dwelling in Chapter 17.06, amend Chapter 17.30 to add accessory dwelling as a permitted use in the RC zone, amend Chapter 17.44 to remove residential uses in the M4 zone, and amend Chapter 17.46 to add accessory dwelling as a permitted use in the REC zone, and to modify the language regarding density. The project is found to be exempt from CEQA.
Mr. Maurer.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the board. Peter Maurer for the Planning Department. This is, as Diane has read, a number of amendments to a number of different sections, but it's focused on the accessory dwelling ordinance provisions of the zoning code. Accessory dwellings have been permitted under state law and by our county code for several decades, and there have been recent state law changes that required us to update our code to be in conformance with that. The primary change that we're proposing with this is currently we have a separate permit process that someone who wants to build an accessory dwelling needs to go through. It's approximately $1,000 fee. It takes several weeks to go through the process. We found that this is unnecessary. It can be handled just as a building permit as any other residential permit. So it not only reduces the cost to provide this method of affordable housing, but also streamlines the process. The same review process that we go through with the accessory dwelling permit can be handled by the building permit. You have to provide, assurance that there's adequate septic capability or connection to public water and sewer. We review it for setbacks and all the other requirements that would normally fall under zoning. So we found that the process we go through is unnecessary, and so we're proposing that that be eliminated with these changes. The other changes are primarily cleanup. The definition was somewhat confusing and also not consistent with state law, so that's been revised to bring that. That's in 1706. The state law requires that wherever we allow a single-family home, we must allow an accessory dwelling, and so there were some inconsistencies with the zones, and so that's why we're changing rural commercial to allow an accessory dwelling, since we do allow a single-family residential use in that zone. Same thing for the rec zone. In the business park zone, it's interesting that it sort of refers back to other zones. Anything that's allowed in the C1 or the C2 or the M2 zone is also allowed in the M4 zone, and a residence is allowed in the commercial zone. We think that's inappropriate to put residences, in, especially either a single-family residence or an accessory dwelling in an industrial park or a business park. It creates more conflicts, and so we're proposing that actually the allowance for a single-family residence in the business park, the M4 zone, be removed. That still allows for a caretaker unit. It's a separate type of residential unit, so if you've got a business that requires some type of a watchman or caretaker, that's still provided in our code, but it's defined differently than an accessory dwelling unit. And then we get into the provisions itself of 1766, which is all the requirements of the accessory dwelling. And most of these changes were made to simply bring it into conformance with state law, as well as removing the unnecessary permit requirements. So I hope you've had a chance to go through the provisions. I won't go through all of them right now unless you have any questions on any of those provisions. We did find this to be exempt. There was a special exemption under CEQA for secondary dwelling units and the ordinances that provide for that. And so we will be prepared to file a notice of exemption if and when this is adopted. We also must submit this to the state for their review, but since we have made it in conformance with state law, there shouldn't be any problem with that. That needs to be submitted to HCD within 60 days. Do you have any questions of me?
Supervisor Mills.
Yeah, just a point for clarity. The ADUs where they're on a single parcel, they are not allowed to be subdivided to take advantage of splitting it into two separate parcels anytime in the future. So if you're under the ADU, that's a parcel that's locked at that point, just for clarity.
Well, by creating an accessory dwelling unit, it doesn't subdivide land. Someone could apply for a parcel map. Let's say you've got 10 acres in a 5-acre zone,
Right.
and you have a single-family residence and an accessory dwelling. You could split that and make them two
Singles.
but they would have to go through the parcel map process. By providing an ADU, it does not in and of itself subdivide the land, and it can't, those units can't be sold separately.
I just wanted that for clarity.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Supervisor Garamendi, your light's on?
Thank you very much. Thanks, Peter. I think this is a good thing to be doing. I did have one question, and I apologize because I can't find the reference, but I have it in my notes here. There's a reference to cannot be used for less than 30 days rental.
Yes.
So I assume that's some sort of provision against VRBOs or Airbnbs or short-term rentals.
That's correct. That's a provision in our code right now. And so we carried that over. It's allowed, state law allows us to do that. And I have a real concern, particularly in some of the communities where we have a lot of vacation rentals and tourist activity, that by building those for the purpose of vacation rentals, short-term rentals, that it, one, defeats the purpose of what the accessory dwellings are meant for, which is affordable housing for people that, need to live and work here, and also changes the character of a community, where you have, neighborhoods that are primarily vacation rentals. They're full up on the weekends, it's party central, and then it's empty during the week. And when I worked in another jurisdiction that covered part of the Tahoe Basin, schools were closing, neighborhoods were empty during the week, and then it was a zoo during the weekend because all the residences, all the houses were vacation rentals. And so I think it's an appropriate provision to limit these to what the intent of the state law is, which is to provide affordable housing for citizens of the community.
I agree, and I support the idea of affordable housing. I think it's important, and you're correct about some of this. I wish there was a way that we could figure out how on communities that aren't impacted, like, obviously some of our communities on the south side of the county, tremendous impact by this, but up in our side of the county, if there was a way that we could figure out some way to allow people to generate additional income so they maybe could afford their homes or bring some more tourists up to the other side. And I don't know what the answer to that is. I just wanted to throw it out as a concern. It's not going to impact how I'm going to approve this, but
Well, we
just
do
don't
have
know the answers.
provisions in the code that allow for bed and breakfast. It's a little more lengthy review process to ensure that those type of uses don't adversely impact the neighborhood. There's adequate facilities to support that and access and those kinds of things. But this is focused on providing affordable housing. And I think that's something that we probably need to get into in the future as we review our zoning ordinance after adoption of the general plan is, how do we want to try to accommodate some of these other types of uses?
I'd like to do that sometime in the future because we do have bed and breakfast, and the rules that are applying here are great. But I know when we run into other policy issues around bed and breakfast issues, you've got the parking and then everything, and it just becomes such a burden that it doesn't allow. And a lot of people on fixed incomes who might have a big house might want to do an Airbnb or bed and breakfast. And this isn't part of this discussion, but in the future, maybe we could talk about that.
Certainly.
Supervisor Oliveira?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One quick question, Mr. Mauer, I don't know if you have this information. Is there any minimum or maximum sizes on the ADUs? Is that,
The maximum size is 1,200 square feet.
yeah,
The minimum size is based on the building code, what is necessary to create a residence, and it's a certain number of square feet. I don't know exactly what that is, but you have to have a cooking facility, a bedroom facility, a toilet, and it sort of adds up to a certain amount. And maybe
so there's a formula.
There is a formula.
Okay, thank you.
And I think it's 50% of the existing structure, right? So if you've got a 1,400 square foot house, you can't get more than 700 square feet. So
That's
that
good.
1,200
If it's an
doesn't apply.
attached unit, it's 50% of the
If it's
existing
attached.
unit. If it's attached. If it's detached, then it's 1,200.
Thank you.
Mr. Mauer, I've been informed that in Calaveras County, we can't build anything less than 600 square feet. I've been unable to find that anywhere. Do you know any knowledge?
There's nothing
about
in the zoning code that says that.
Okay.
somewhere around that is my understanding of what the building code requires, but I'm not a building code expert, and I'm not sure. I know that there's quite a movement to allow for tiny homes, which might be 300 square feet. I don't have a problem with that. If someone wants to be able to build something small, as long as it meets all of the health and safety requirements for housing, there's no reason that I can think of that we should put a minimum building size on something if they can make something smaller work. But those are primarily building code questions that are being looked at, and it's sort of a statewide issue right now.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Supervisor Mills?
Yes, I just don't want this to meld into the short-term vacation rental issue that we have at Lake Tulloch, for instance, and why we developed Title 20. If you're going to develop this for low-income housing along a lake, it's a great idea, but how quickly could that fall into what happened up at Tahoe?
Right.
So we just want to be sure that we're going to stay on this discussion, very clearly defining that this is for low-income housing and to add the additional benefit on parcels, but that the whole discussion about Airbnbs and other things has to be a separate discussion, and I think we need maybe have a broader discussion than just what's around the lake.
Yes, I would agree.
And it's long overdue, I think, within the realm of what our county codes look at, because many of these parcels, for instance, where they're very tight, you're literally putting hotels or motels right in the middle of residential neighborhoods, and just how far does that go before you conflict? So those are separate discussions, and I want to be sure that we just stay on this issue of the low-income housing, and that's the whole purpose of what we're doing here.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, one more quick question. Mr. Mauer, just recently, you and I have been in contact with people looking at what glamping facilities are, and that has no effect with the ADUs as we're discussing now, correct?
That's correct.
So that's a completely separate, different issue.
Yes.
Thank you.
So, Peter, I do have a question that has to do with affordable housing. So you're saying that every time somebody comes forward with plans and asks for a permit to construct additional housing on their property, it goes towards our quota of
Yes.
affordable housing?
Yes, it does.
Does every regardless of the reasons, it does count?
It
towards our
counts,
quota?
yes.
Okay.
The accessory dwelling unit is by definition affordable under state law. So when we report to the state every year, when we built 24 accessory dwelling units, that's 24 housing units credited towards the county.
Good. Okay, that's all I have. Yes, Supervisor Clapp.
Yeah, it's according to Mike's question, is the CCs and Rs directs what size the minimums? I think in Circle 20s it's 400 square foot, Rancho's 800, and Lot 10 is like 1,400. And if it's a two-story, it adds one way or the other too.
So that, the limits are geographical then, within the county? Is that set by a county
CCs and
ordinance?
Homeowners.
Subdivision.
Subdivision rules?
It's a
A
subdivision.
lot of it
map
has to
that's
do with
on it.
CC&Rs.
Yeah.
Okay,
It
all
just-
right.
Yeah, not county, but the CC&Rs.
CC&Rs,
Yeah.
okay.
My subdivision is 1,200 square
Yeah.
foot at minimum.
Well, just to confirm, though, there are no HOAs in the circles, or in Bar Circle or Diamond 20. So there are no, we go
So
back to the county
CC&Rs,
limits.
conditions, covenants, restrictions, are private deed restrictions between the developers of a subdivision and the buyers of that. The county does not enforce those CC&Rs. Those are private agreements between private parties. But they're legally enforceable by those people involved in that. So where there are CC&Rs that might have a minimum size, or it might even restrict that, that would be something that the private entities would have to enforce, the homeowner association or whoever enforces those. But as far as the county code goes, we would have sort of the minimum standard.
Absolutely correct. All right, we'll open it up at this time to public comments. Any public comments? No public comments. All righty, then I'll close public comments and bring it back to the board. Looking for a motion.
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Supervisor Garamendi, a second by Supervisor Mills. Call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0.
Thank you.
All right. We've arrived at item number 17.
Item 17 is from the Code Compliance Department to introduce and waive reading of the ordinance superseding and replacing the current Chapter 8.06 of the Calaveras County Code, Public Abatement Property Maintenance Code.
Mr. Short.
Good afternoon, Chair and Board. We're going to bring back the 8.06. The last time we had a public meeting, the Board directed staff to go out to the public, and we did. We had a public hearing, meeting with the industry work group. I think a couple supervisors were there. We had a really good dialogue. We had some changes. Just to remind, this is, basically, this is going to be the lessons learned that we did from the last code enforcement. We're trying to do a comprehensive approach to facilitate some sustainable code enforcement, which we have more of a combined approach to a more efficient and effective code enforcement group. We're going to have Ethan talk about the legalities of the changes specifically, and then we'll open it up for questions. Is there any questions on that?
No?
Okay. Ethan?
Hello, Board. Ethan Turner, Deputy County Counsel. So over the last couple of days, a surprising number of questions have come about the changes in this ordinance, and a number of concerns have been raised. And I thought that it'd be most productive to spend this time to talk about the difference between the old 8.06 and the new, to try and answer some of those questions and allay some of the concerns that have been raised by members of the public. And I'm just going to go through them. One concern I heard yesterday was that there's expanded...
Ethan, can you pull the microphone
Yes,
closer to you?
absolutely. How's that? One of the current concerns I heard yesterday was that there's expanded investigatory powers that allow people to go on, allows code compliance to more easily enter upon people's property. That's emphatically not the
Mr. Chair,
case.
could I interrupt for a moment?
Yeah.
Ethan, could you date the old 806, what date that was actually effective for the county?
February of 2017?
Yeah, okay, so that was the most recent one
That's right.
before this.
And-
So it's February of 2017.
Yep, and
So
I'm
that was
not...
done by this board?
Yes.
Okay, I want to make sure.
Okay. So the concern that was raised to me yesterday, one of them was that there's expanded powers of investigation, expanded powers of code compliance officers to enter upon people's properties. And I wanted to assure the public and the board that there has been no changes whatsoever on that front. And I would direct the board's attention to 8.06.090A. And the last sentence of that subdivision requires landowner consent before entering upon a property. Subdivision B requires consent of the occupants. And subdivision C requires that where there is no consent from both the owners and the occupants, that a warrant be acquired by the investigating officer before they enter upon the property after showing good cause. So there's absolutely no change whatsoever in the authority of enforcing officers to enter upon people's properties. And if there were, it would be unconstitutional. So there is no change like that in this ordinance. Second, the concern I received from a member of the public via email and from a member of the board was expanded powers of summary abatement. There is no expansion of powers of summary abatement in this ordinance. The language actually is substantially the same as the old one. Government Code Section 25845 authorizes code compliance officers, when they find a code violation that constitutes an immediate threat to public health and safety, to enter upon that property and mitigate that hazard through reasonable means. And Government Code Section 53069.4A2 allows for immediate assessment of fines when a code violation does constitute an immediate threat to public health and safety. So that has not changed. Those are creatures of the government code, and there has been no change at all in the summary abatement authority of the code compliance officers. Fines. There's been what I would almost characterize as something bordering on hysteria regarding increases in fines regarding in this code compliance change. There is actually not one penny of increased fines. If you look at our fine schedule, it tracks that of Government Code 253132, and that deals with infractions. Now, under the law, under the Government Code, a violation of a county ordinance is a misdemeanor. Yet our fine schedule tracks the infraction schedule that you find in that section of the Government Code, and again, it was 25132, and our fines are actually lower than those that are allowed by the government code, and they've also not been increased by 1 penny from the fine schedule that was in the old 8.06. So there is no increase in fines, no expansion of summary abatement authority, and no changes in the investigatory powers of enforcement officers. There is a change, however, in how fines are collected. In the 8.06 before last, the one that previously existed before February of 2017, code compliance officers had,
Could we get a date on that one?
I don't know that date, it's many years old. It was updated in February of 2017. I
Okay,
don't know.
prior to February of
Yes.
2017, 806, I believe that was actually handled by the previous board.
That
at
may
one
be the
time.
case. I don't know. I'm only referencing it because I want to explain to the board how fines have been dealt with by code compliance officers as those ordinances have been changed.
Okay,
Can-
thank you.
Can I just get a point of clarification? When you say the old 8.06, Ethan, are you just referring to the 8.06 that's on the books now, and the new one is the proposed one?
Yeah, thank you. Yes. I mean, I should say the current 8.06,
Okay.
the current 8.06 that was adopted and is currently in effect starting in February of 2017. And for the point of clarification, the point I was about to make relates to the 8.06 that preceded that one. And that one allowed code compliance officers broad discretion in reducing or even waiving fines from property owners based on a certain criteria. The interim building director that preceded Mr. Short was concerned that that allowed disproportionate treatment or disparate treatment, unequal treatment, and allowed the potential for abuses of discretion. So he removed that. And the current 8.06 has very little discretion for code compliance officers to reduce or waive fines, and only has one method of collection. That's demand it and then sue for it. And the proposed 8.06 has methods for collection that are less harsh, such as incentivizing payment of fines by withholding permits and licenses from other county departments, except those permits and licenses that are necessary to correct the code violations, and by recording notices of violations which run with the property until such time as the fines are paid. And those are not nice remedies, but it's a lot better than being sued, getting a writ of execution, and having your bank account levied. So we wanted to create administrative methods for fine collection that aren't as stark and aren't as harsh as suing people. And it's also less burdensome on county staff. And those provisions can be found in 8.06.310 and 8.06.400. And if you look at 8.06.440, it talks about some of the discretion that's available to code compliance officers in dealing with fines. The primary significant changes that are found in the new 8.06 are a fee schedule, and as Ed will explain after we're through, that fee schedule is going to be brought forward to the board in August, if we're lucky, and everything goes well. It's being dealt with by consultants right now, and until that fee schedule is adopted, there will be no fees charged pursuant to this ordinance, assuming it's adopted today. It takes 60 days after the adoption of a fee schedule for it to become effective. So assuming the fee schedule was adopted in August, it wouldn't be implemented until sometime in late October. And I want to talk about appeals, because I think appeals are something that are not broadly understood by the public. So how a code violation enforcement action begins is a code enforcement officer makes an administrative determination. They make findings of fact and apply the law. And so when a code enforcement officer decides that there is a code violation, they look at the situation and then determine whether or not they should issue a courtesy notice, which are available under the new ordinance, or a notice of violation. And then after they issue a notice of violation, if there's been no reasonable compliance with the terms of the notice of violation, then they issue a citation, which causes fines to begin accruing. So each one of those is an administrative decision that can be subject to a due process hearing, whereby the Planning Commission, sitting as the administrative hearing board, would scrutinize the decisions made by the hearing officer and assess whether there's been an abuse of discretion, whether the findings of fact that were made were correct, and to make sure that the findings were based on the evidence. It's not an opportunity for the Planning Commission and then subsequently the board to dispense equitable remedies and accord relief to those who've been cited by code compliance. They are inquiries into the propriety of the decisions made by code enforcement officers, which are then likely to be subject to, or not likely, but could be subject to judicial review. And then the courts would then look to the decisions made by the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission to make sure that the principles of equal protection were observed and the requirements of due process were met. It's like I said, it's not a situation where the Planning Commission or the board can make it all go away. It's a review of the administrative decisions. If we do want, as much as possible, to have informal resolution of code violations, and if to the extent the board wishes to involve themselves in that, code compliance has adopted a policy whereby they will inform board members when a notice of violation or any other citation is issued in their jurisdiction, so that they can then make sure that their constituent gets the help they need, is informed of their rights, and can work with code compliance to resolve the code compliance issues. Now, that kind of intervention and that kind of informal resolution has to start at the beginning of the process, because once notices of violation citations have been issued, those are administrative orders that will become final unless they're appealed. And when they are appealed, the function of the appeal is to scrutinize those decisions for the adequacy of the findings and determinations of fact and proper application of the law. It's not an opportunity to take care of the constituents. So I wanted to give a couple of examples of appeals and why we're advocating, why the building department and the code compliance unit is advocating for movement from the administrative hearing board to the courts, to a hearing officer program as a one-stop shop. And the reason that staff is in favor of that is because it saves time, it saves money, and affords appellants much quicker access to adjudication of their rights. And if we've made a mistake, then vindication of their rights. So if, let's say, for example, a code enforcement officer goes out to an apartment complex or a business, and he finds that the building is unfit for human habitation, that it's in dangerous condition, he red tags it, closes it down, asks everyone to leave. The owner of that building, or a resident, or any other interested party, could then appeal that to the administrative hearing board, which is the planning commission sitting as the administrative hearing board. We create staff reports. We work with planning to schedule a hearing. Ms. Moss-Lewis sits with the planning commission, advises them about their quasi-adjudicatory role. It involves many staff members, staff reports, scheduling, and then whatever happens at that hearing can be appealed by either party to the Board of Supervisors. Now, all the costs associated with all that effort are borne by taxpayers, and it's a great expense. It then goes to the board, and then we have a third attorney participating in the process, Ms. Stedfeld, advising the board as to their quasi-adjudicatory authority and function in that role. And then there's, again, more staff reports. We create an IMQ2 item. We get cooperation from the clerk of the board. And once again, many members of staff are involved in these. And once again, the entire cost of that hearing are borne by taxpayers. The solution that we offer in the new 8.06, the proposed 8.06, is that there be an appeal fee and that the appeals be handled by a professional hearing officer. And that serves several functions. One, it's cheaper, it's faster, and provides an objective third party who can then review the facts and ascertain whether or not the correct decision was made by a code enforcement officer, and they can shepherd the creation of a defensible administrative record in the event that we are sued. One problem that has been raised to me by staff that gives rise to concern about the board is that it is frequently the case, and happens weekly, that the complaints about code compliance go from a constituent to a board member to code compliance. And when we bring those code compliance issues before the board, there's a problem with the probability of a bias. That risk is also eliminated. Additionally, if by having a hearing officer. Additionally, there's the concerns about equal protection. If a board member wants to help out a constituent, it could result in situations where we have disparate treatment of offending parties, and it could create problems. Now, I know that the board takes their role very seriously and seeks to avoid that, and would be advised by counsel throughout that whole process. But there is an appearance, and I regard it as something of a concern. So it's cheaper, there's less risk, and it's much faster, and requires one staff report, one hearing, before the appellant could then take their rights to Superior Court, should they so choose. Oh, thank you. Yes, and Sabrina just pointed out to me that when an appellant, if they prevail, there's no cost to them. So when we make a mistake and we bring a case before a hearing officer, and the appellant wins, they recover their appeal fees. They don't have to pay any fines, and they can even recover attorney's fees only to the extent that we expend attorney's fees. So, for example, let's say some lawyer comes up from San Francisco and he's $800 an hour. He can only recover the amount that I'm paid, which is nothing like that, of course. I think that covers most of the concerns, but the final one, and the one that has, I think, been most controversial in the public, is the concern that a fee-driven program incentivizes code enforcement to undertake enforcement action for the purposes of raising revenue. That's not what's going on here, and it's actually this set of incentives replaces a much worse set of incentives that predated this proposed ordinance. Fees, by definition, cannot exceed the cost of the services. That'd be a violation of Article 13C, Section 1, Subdivision E, if you care. The cost of a fee can never, ever exceed the cost of providing the service, and that's why we have consultants working on the fee schedule right now, because we don't want to have a large amount of fees that are disproportionate to the amount that the cost of rendering services is. Additionally, for decades now, code compliance's only way to collect administrative costs of enforcement is by taking a case all the way to the issuance of an abatement warrant, at which time you can then get assessment liens to recover all of the costs of the abatement, including the administrative costs. So having a fee program where we pay as we go takes away that incentive. It creates an incentive whereby we can work with the public to come to more informal and voluntary resolution of code compliance issues. Because if you work your way all the way to the end and get an assessment lien, which is the final stage of an abatement order, it's possible for a person's house even to be sold to recover the administrative costs of abatement. Now, to me, what we're doing now with a fee schedule where we can recover administrative costs as we go, we're eliminating the incentive to do that. And we're making it so that code compliance officers don't need to do that. So all in all, this ordinance has no greater fines, no greater powers of enforcement or investigation, no greater summary abatement powers, has more opportunities for informal resolution of code compliance issues, and eliminates the incentive to drive a code case all the way to an assessment lien when someone's house could be sold. So this is actually a softer, gentler code compliance ordinance than we previously had. And the public perception that it is anything other than that is misguided and would be dispelled if they just looked at similar ordinances throughout the state that are all subject to the same government code provisions that underline this code section. And I think Sabrina had some comments. I can take questions now too,
Can I just
but
ask a quick question?
yes.
Ethan, as you compare these, 8.06 as it currently stands, was written for cannabis enforcement, the one we're currently working under, right?
One provision of it was, 8.06.600 was. The remainder of it is entirely for ordinary code compliance efforts. And that's the current one, the one that's in effect now, has a dual track program whereby code compliance has one track for ordinary code compliance and then another expedited track for cannabis.
So now, so it isn't different insofar as that now if it's a non-cannabis offense, it's now on the fast track like cannabis was, correct?
Negative. It's,
Well, I got her nodding and you say negative.
Yeah.
So what is it?
The appeal timelines are different, but they both would be heard by the hearing officer. So they would have a greater amount of time to correct their violations.
Hey, be quiet.
So, yeah, if you look at, I think it's 8.06.700 is this provision for expedited hearings. And that actually has a totally different process. So let's say that
What was the number again? I'm sorry.
8.06.700, I believe it is.
Page 26 or 29.
Yeah, our page number's
Um,
different.
Packet, page 246.
246?
Yeah.
Well, your guys' page numbers are sometimes different because if there was closed session items. Page numbers aren't coincident.
Page 12 of 29?
26 or 29.
Yeah, and the code section is 8.06.700. Yeah. And so when, let's say Ed here is cultivating cannabis in his backyard and has more than 6 plants growing outside, which we regard then as a commercial cannabis activity. And so we would then give him a notice of violation citation, order to abate, and order to show cause. And he would have a hearing date automatically set within 15 days of the issuance of that citation. He would have 10 days to voluntarily abate his cannabis if he wants to avoid fines. If he did that and provided adequate evidence of abatement and had the abatement verified by a code enforcement officer, that item would be taken off calendar and it would not occur. Now let's say that a code enforcement officer goes out onto that property and they notice that there's a commercial cultivation site and there's also an illegal structure that's being used for employee housing. He notices some illegal grading that was done without permits. Under the current program, the cultivator would get one expedited hearing program citation, which would be called a notice of violation citation and notice of hearing, and an automatic hearing would be set. The other code violations would be subject to a notice of violation in order to abate, and he would have an opportunity to appeal those on the ordinary slow code track. So it creates a divergent course. And what we're trying to do is to get everything on the same course. Because this happened day before yesterday to one of our code compliance officers. Oh, no, I guess it was last week actually, but he went out to a cannabis cultivation site, issued a notice of violation citation, order to abate, and order to show cause, and set up an expedited hearing. But then he had a cite for illegal grading that was also on the property. The person had cut 4 pads. And so now we have a dual track program for this particular individual, and it's a little bit irritating for staff.
It's convoluted. They have to get it, like Mr. Turner already stated, get it calendared with the Planning Commission, get it calendared with the board. It's very cumbersome and time-consuming for the officer who's still trying to investigate other cases and do their jobs well.
Excuse me, Mr. Turner, what is the alternative? You mentioned the cannabis one, that's 700. What is the process for non-cannabis? Where is that in this?
Yeah,
You said they were different?
Yes, yeah, for non-cannabis, and for summary abatement for that matter. There's, I think it's 8.06.240. That's, the person requests an appeal in writing to the clerk of the administrative hearing board, and then we set up a hearing date, and we have our hearing. And that, I think that has to be done within 15 days of the issuance of a notice of violation or citation.
So the primary difference being,
Being they can either appeal or not, and if they so choose, and they have a lengthier time frame in which to schedule their appeal, to get representation, consult with an attorney, whatever they want to do. They have more time. Let's say they appeal on the 15th day, they might not have a hearing for a few weeks, and they could have ample time to prepare. Additionally, there's restrictions on cannabis-based enforcement, on the number of continuances that are available, and when they're available and if they're available. It has to be for good cause and for not more than 10 days. For a regular code compliance case where there's no exigency whatsoever, they can drag it out at their convenience.
you say 8.06.240?
I'm going to double check that, but I believe
Because there is no
There's
240.
no 2.0.
240.
There is no 240. There's,
210 is method of general service.
yeah.
While he's looking at, I wanted to kind of clarify on that process when before we would have a specialized case officer go out for cannabis, and then subsequently on another date, another code enforcement had to go out and get on the general code enforcement. So it took two inspectors at different times to go out there, or officers to go out there to get the code violations in the two separate tracks. Very inefficient, not very cost effective. The other one, we only had one officer for the whole district, and the workload was so tremendous that it stack up. It would take years for it to even catch up. So it's similar to a combination building inspector, where you have one does multidisciplinary. This is very efficient because you can go out and take it all at once, do everything at once, and then have a hearing all at once. It's very efficient.
And that code section is 8.06.600. And it says that a hearing will be held no less than 14 days and no more than 90 days after a request for appeal is made. If the board doesn't mind, there's one other question that I received via email that I had not addressed. It was the individual writing the email was confused about the difference between a notice of violation and a citation. They read the section on citations thinking that it applied to notices of violation when it doesn't. And based on that confusion, she came to the conclusion that a person who is making reasonable efforts and acting in good faith to comply with a notice of violation could be fined. Now, that is simply not the case. A person who receives a courtesy notice will not be fined ever, so long as they make reasonable good faith efforts to comply with the requirements of the code. A person who receives a notice of violation, though they will receive a case management fee, because that's how a case begins, is with a notice of violation, may never receive a fine so long as they make reasonable good faith efforts to correct a condition constituting the nuisance or code violation during the required period. And even if they then fail and fines begin to accrue, those fines can stop accruing pursuant to voluntary agreements, which are also laid out in this code. And if you've blown it, you've missed the deadline, fines are starting to accrue, you can work with your code compliance officers to stop fines from accruing by entering into a voluntary agreement that are outlined in provisions of this code. And those fines would not accrue unless and until the voluntary settlement agreement was breached.
You mentioned that the fees continue from the beginning, so that clock keeps ticking.
Fees are a flat fee. It's a flat fee.
Okay, I have other questions.
Any other questions? Supervisor Oliveira?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I kind of want to switch gears here a little bit. Let's talk about the appeal process. Is there one? Now, as I understand and reviewing the ordinance, once the hearing officer makes a decision, the appeal process is in Superior Court.
That's correct.
So it goes right from hearing officer into litigation in court.
That's correct.
All right. Now, I have a problem with that. I would like to see some type of method where the representative of the people that have been elected has that review process on that. And I know that we had that in the past, and it hasn't worked very well. Is there any process that we could explore to see the input from a board, be it the Board of Supervisors, in those cases where the appeal has been filed after the hearing officer? I mean, has that been eliminated? There's no possible way to do that.
You could certainly write in, we could certainly write in a provision like that. It would sort of defeat the purpose of delegating your quasi-adjudicatory authority to the hearing officer. Unless you wanted to have it just as a final backstop, I suppose.
That's what I'm looking at right now,
Yeah.
because when we go to a hearing officer, and our hearing officers are selected, they're attorneys, and they're selected from a panel, and I don't know how you select each hearing officer to hear each case, lottery, draw, whatever it may be.
It's laid out in the code. It's random alphabetical.
Random alphabetical. There could be a chance, is there any disqualification of a hearing officer?
Yeah.
Due to a conflict, and there's
Yeah,
a procedure for that.
Yeah, if an appellant walked in and they said, "Hey, that's my stepdad" or something, they could, or they had a bad experience with that attorney before, they could certainly disqualify that.
Okay, I want to make sure that that's in place. Okay, but I personally, I would like to see something like that. An avenue of appeal to the representative that the people have voted in to represent them, such as the Board of Supervisors. A suggestion.
Supervisor Clapp?
Yeah, I had an experience over a year ago, and Tim helped me out. I started working with this, and it was in my district, and it was an elderly person that had a lot of problems. And we ended up having HHS involved, we had animal control involved, we had Ed did an excellent job, and I think we had health department involved on it. And I think if it wasn't for coming to where I got involved in it, because there's so many agencies involved in it, it really turned out to be real good. And I think if it went into the system you're talking now, it'd have been a nightmare on the individual because they were not able to take care of themselves. And so I never want to advocate my position of being able to step in and helping somebody.
I understand that. And it seems to me that the appropriate time to intervene is before things get out of hand. Because once an abatement order is issued, that's kind of it. So if a board member or other members of the community wish to intervene in a situation where an individual needs help resolving a code compliance issue, that's certainly something that should happen early in the process. And I would also point out that our codes compliance officers are not vindictive, cruel people. When they come across a person who needs help, they can usually spend a lot of time figuring out how that person's situation can be resolved. Our code enforcement officer, Courtney Meinhardt, is particularly good at that and has been doing it for many, many years.
Supervisor Mills?
Yeah, I just want to put this in perspective with I think more of a question. You folks have reviewed a lot of nuisance ordinances in other counties in California?
Yes.
And in those reviews, are you finding that what you're putting together here is strict, very strict, or some of the more lenient nuisance codes in a county in California?
It's certainly more lenient than every single urban code.
So-
I would say that some other codes, in Amador County's code, for example, is pretty much toothless, but they don't really have any recourse at all for code violations. But Ed really wants to talk here, so.
Like, yeah, I know, like larger cities, of course, like LA, if you built a structure illegally, they just demo it, there's zero tolerance.
So you have to demolition the structure before they'll even talk to you.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that there is not a single urban jurisdiction that doesn't have a harsher code than this code.
So you're feeling that what we have here,
Okay, all right, okay.
what you feel we're having here, though, we're not an urban environment, we are rural.
Yeah.
And that the code, as you have it written here, does fit within the character of the rural environment that we're in. It does provide eliminating that dual track that you had spoken to before, which creates a problem. And it is not really specific to the type of nuisance. You're trying to get them all to wrapped around one single methodology here and how we're handling them. And the goal is to gain compliance, not to gain enforcement. Is that a good way to summarize what you're doing?
100% correct. We've
Okay.
had such great success with the hearing officer, and all we could say last year was, wouldn't it be great if all code issues could go this route? Because we really enjoyed working with the hearing officers. They're extremely knowledgeable on law, the Constitution, and extremely neutral.
And we didn't always win.
That's very true.
Yeah, so it's, I think it's fair, and it provides the public with a less expensive, faster way to vindicate their rights.
And that's a good statement, that we don't always win. It's not an expectation to win or to do that here. The expectation is that we gain compliance or gain some method of minimizing the hazard or the risk that might be involved as a result of this nuisance being in place. So it is not vindictive in any way. It's simply how do we work with the public. I have examples even in my district where, like you were talking about, where elderly people and things just spiral out of control. There are many, many organizations that will help people like that if they knew that they were there. It isn't trying to force them into something that they can't physically do. There are people out there that are willing to help them if they knew that they were there and needed help. So I would like to be sure that we're going to continue on that track of how do we help people to help themselves. That's ultimately what it comes down to.
And that's why we're excited about the implementation of the courtesy notice, the non-punitive education.
Right.
And I believe I mentioned this in the last meeting, maybe not, but our new software that we are preparing to launch will
Track it.
automatically route those notices to the district supervisor. So you'll be aware of all activity in your district automatically.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
You're given that opportunity to, assist your constituents.
Great. Thank you, Chair.
Any other board questions at this time? Okay,
I'm going to reserve until after public comments.
okay. We'll open up for public comments.
When I read this section on item number 17, saying code compliance, introduce and waive reading of the ordinance superseding and replacing the current chapter 8.06 of the Calaveras County Code, I'm requesting that the reading be read in and not waived. Thank you. We have people out in TV land that need to hear the entire testimony. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Janice Bassett from Valley Springs, and one of the things that I did when I found out about this hearing today was I reached out to some of my friends and said, hey, this is happening, do you want to come down and speak to the Board of Supervisors about it? and nobody had heard anything about it. And my friends are people that try to stay connected and know what's happening in their community, and nobody even knew about this. So my concern is that due process is not given to the community to address this. So that's one issue. And especially now times when things are our due process is being assaulted on many fronts, on the local level and on the national level. So that's something that I'd really like to see addressed. So this 8.06 update is an example of the misplaced priority and direction of this board. This code was updated just last February. The building department has more pressing needs. For instance, a streamlined and comprehensive permitting process to encourage new home construction. There is a housing shortage in Calaveras County. In D2, we lost 800 structures and over 400 homes in the Butte Fire. The housing stock has not been replaced. During the budget hearings last month, it was revealed that the county has $9.26 million structural deficit. CAO Lutz identified a long-term solution, specifically identified the need for reviewing revenue-producing activities and reviewing fee schedule and updating. The updated 8.06 appears to be an attempt to implement these long-term solutions to address the loss of cannabis revenue and fill the gap. And that's exactly what these stopgap measures before layoffs and cuts to services. As Lutz puts it, the county still needs to evaluate what services are provided and to cease some activities. With priorities like these, the county is chasing diminishing returns in the form of one-time fees and fines instead of focusing on a comprehensive and unified approach to facilitate reconstruction in the burn area, which would in turn increase property values and tax revenues, or regulating commercial cannabis and using the $13 million in tax revenue to improve our county. We need policies that are responsive to the community's needs, not the special interest groups that have Dennis Miller's ear. We need houses, we need economic opportunities, we need to attract and retain young families, and we need to improve our tax base so that they are not depending on handouts from the state. The board is pursuing a strategy emphasizing code enforcement, and the administration increased fees and fines to fund the enterprise at the expense of new home construction, jobs, property, and values.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Board. Sandy Mitra, District 2. I'm here again before you because of the replacement for Chapter 8.06. My concern is related to a known situation within the Butte burn scar that brings Calaveras County's ability to properly enforce the provisions within the revised chapter into question. As background, myself and another Mountain Ranch constituent met with Director Short, who pulled in Director Maurer on October 16, 2017, regarding Calaveras County 17.93 and the sunset of the disaster declaration for Butte and the use of trailers for temporary housing. While Governor Brown's executive order provided 3 years of temporary housing, Calaveras County only allowed for 2. It did provide for a year extension. I don't believe that was done. There may have been an extension granted, but if not, that places many individuals at some level of risk. I can assure you nearly 9 months after that meeting took place that many trailers remain as primary homes throughout the burn scar. I bring this to the board's attention because this is a real example of the harm the provisions and revisions to 8.06 will do. Calaveras County would be required by this ordinance to move on trailers not properly accounted for and permitted within the burn scar, and displace many residents still waiting to settle their claims with PG&E. They would essentially be made homeless. Is this really what you want to do to these people? It also opens the county up to possible litigation under Cal 815.6. Under Cal 815.6, Calaveras County will find they have a mandatory duty liability under this state statute. Once the county decides to inspect and finds violations, Cal 815.6 gives the county no discretion over whether to record the notice of violation. The county must act, and it must do it in a timely manner. Gentlemen, I hope this information causes you to pause and think about the enforcement side of what is proposed, along with the potential downsides. Do not move so swiftly as to harm your constituents who have lost, for many of them, everything they hold dear. Do not rush and open a door to further costly litigation whereby your constituents will ultimately bear the cost. I ask that you be wise yet cautious. Thank you. Any questions? Thank you again.
Any other public comments?
Hello, my name is Cynthia. I represent 29 homes in Wilseyville.
Can you speak up a little bit, ma'am? to the
I
microphone?
represent 29 homes in Wilseyville, California. Jack Garamendi is our district supervisor. And I received an email yesterday, and it's also from someone who lives there. It says, our government is only able to do what it does because no one pays attention, because no one speaks up, because no one stops them. This Tuesday, if no one pays attention and no one speaks up and no one takes a stand to stop them from adopting 8.06, we will have let them take away our rights, to turn our properties into liabilities instead of assets, and to make us pay for this service. 8.6 will dramatically increase code enforcement authority to administer fees and fines and to conduct summary abatement, while drastically reducing our response time and our appeals, which will become cost prohibited, as we have to pay the county's attorney fees along with close to a dozen additional fees and fines, and have been created under the new 8.06. So my question is to this: how does this affect single-family dwellings? How does this affect my neighbors, really? I mean, if they have a container that they're using for storage on their property, are they going to have to get rid of it? Are they going to be fined? I don't really know what 8.06 stands for. To me, it's just 8.06, because I don't know what the criteria is for a fine or no fine. So people are kind of in limbo where I'm at, because they're usually working 5 days a week if they're lucky, somewhere else, and travel long distances in between, and then have the regular household duties that they need to maintain. So my question is this really something necessary for all the citizens of Calaveras County, or is it just for the select few of the people that are harvesting and growing, cropping, and performing badly or good? I don't think everybody is bad in this county. I think some growers are probably way out there and have caused their own demise, but really, the everyday person that lives here, to struggle to live in these little town communities and live the life that they have, do they really need another fine?
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tim McDonald, District 1 voter. This happened in your district last year. This is not something that anybody in your office should be proud of. One of my neighbors was cited, had a citation put on his fence for his illegal cannabis cultivation site up in Circle 20. Do you guys remember the case? Not cultivation. Well, it was cultivation, but it was not of cannabis. Peppers. Wax peppers. Known throughout the county for their wax peppers. Columbia wax peppers. Been doing it for probably 25, 30 years now at the same place. Code compliance or some apparatus thereof flew by in a helicopter. Saw something green. So at that time, it was all dropped, no fees, no fines, under this new proposal
he would have been charged an administrative fee and how many other fees would go on, because they actually came out and inspected to make sure that they were peppers, because they couldn't tell. My question as a landowner is, we've heard about drones and peeking over fences. So if you look over my fence, if the code compliance guy is driving by and he sees a Connex, is he going to show up? Am I going to get a letter? How's that whole process going to work? This guy had peppers that had been growing for years and years and years, and had to take time out of his day, a whole day's pay, to come down and defend growing peppers. So I'm wondering how much more access onto our property does the county need? Where I come from, I'm originally from Texas, and people don't look over fences. People, certainly, government entities don't enter onto private property with closed gates to investigate without a warrant. And it seems to me this is just a way to get around without having a warrant to go after cannabis cultivators. It's a way to get in there and get a peek. That seems un-American to me. It's certainly going to be un-American on my property. That's not how I live my life. I don't go into my neighbor's yard. I don't look over his fence. And I certainly don't expect my government to look over my fence and look for violations to be able to come onto my property to find something criminal.
Bonnie Newman from Double Springs. If we didn't have such a high population, we wouldn't be complaining about what our neighbors do. In the Butte fire scar, there are still hundreds of houses that have not been rebuilt. Hundreds of PG&E cases have not been resolved. People are still living in temporary housing within the burn scar. Many more people have purchased shipping containers for storage purposes on their properties in place of permitted sheds and shops lost in the fire. The building department policy changes are being crafted and implemented without even seeking any input from the Butte fire survivors. The building department is reinterpreting driveway slope, setbacks, and shipping container regulations. The building department is also undertaking a fee study which is expected to drastically increase permit fees, inspection costs, etc. This is on top of the reported 300% increase in the cost of building permits since January. These policy changes are making rebuilding cost prohibitive for most of those who've yet to rebuild. The building department is exacerbating the already existing housing shortage. Code enforcement has already begun throwing Butte fire victims off their properties. Now it appears the new court enforcement regime will target Butte fire victims as an alternative revenue stream. This is how many people perceive the proposed updated 8.06. It is important that this board understand that by adopting this update to 8.06, you are adopting what is seen by many as an incredibly punitive and predatory code enforcement regime that will disproportionately penalize Butte fire victims and District 2. Instead of helping rebuild houses and working with the community to resolve the housing crisis, the building department is unleashing code enforcement on people to make sure they're living on their own property, they're not living on their own property, not storing possessions on their property, making sure they're 30 feet from the neighbors, and that the driveway is at the appropriate angle.
Good afternoon. I'm Ray Good, pastor of Sheep Ranch, District 2. I'm probably going to be all over the place for a second, so try to go with me. My mother told me years ago when I was just a boy, and she's repeated it 100 times, there's no excuse for bad manners, and yet right now I'm tempted. I'm in a very wonderful position. I mean, I'm grateful for where I am in life, that nothing you're proposing or or doing or anything I'm doing is going to jeopardize me. And yet, unlike some of you on the board, I have a burden on my heart for the people here in Calaveras County that I love. I love this county. I love this place. I've never gone anywhere in this county where I didn't feel like I was welcomed or at home. And that includes those poor people that you seem to despise who live in trailers. There's some 100,000 plus people on the West Coast living in tents and RVs and in trailers. Seattle, down to LA. Homeless, living under bridges. And what are you doing? I'm telling you this right now. The state of mind is a vicious circle. First we create a problem and then we attempt to solve it. So right now you're thinking about throwing people off their properties because they live in a trailer. How dare they? If they had hundreds of thousands of dollars at their disposal, they'd build a house. They don't want to live in that tent. They don't want to live in a trailer. But what would you do? You would have them be homeless. And then I swear to God, within 1 year, we'll be right here going, what are we going to do about this homeless problem? Well, we need to get grant money to fix this problem we've created. I digress. You would never admit you created the problem. So I'm looking at you and I'm thinking, are you so inured to human suffering that you would continue with this program? The people who you propose this 8.06 to, the people who would be persecuted, prosecuted under this, are probably not the wealthiest people in our community. So next year when we have a spike in domestic violence and children being neglected and homelessness, I can't wait for your solutions of where you're going to get the money to help with all these new problems. I think it's time to reach down inside your cold little black hearts and find some love for your fellow people and let them just exist as they are for a moment. Nobody wants to stay in poverty. They'll all work their way out of it if you help them, give them a chance, and encourage some industry here.
Thank you. Quiet, please.
Hello, once again, Terry McBride, District 1. The other night I went to sleep and I had this terrible dream. It was a nightmare. I woke up in San Francisco at one of the most punitive, restrictive, and prohibitive HOAs ever. And oh my God, it's here in Calaveras County. The hell are you thinking? And then you talk about these bins. Well, I'm wondering, these cargo bins, are you going to take care of the ones the county owns? How about the ones that the churches have? What about the schools? You can have them all lifted up, and are you going to pay for all that foundation work with all the excess money this county has right now? That's a good way to do it. You are hammering the people of this county. Shame on you. I have helicopters fly over our place. God forbid privacy. I kind of want to run out there naked one day, but I'm afraid they'd be blinded by the sight and have a wreck. But then I'm starting to wonder, oh, hey, wait, look, there's a little building. Oh, it's not in our book. A doghouse. Wait, there's a rabbit hutch. What the hell? We can tax that. We can make them get a permit for the chicken coop. Oh, my God, a chicken coop? Did you want me to have it properly cleaned and send you pictures and that kind of stuff? This is ridiculous. Go back to the city. If you're going to write these kinds of codes, you got to write these kinds of rules. You go right back to them because this is not urban. This is rural. This is county. This is Calaveras County. This is country. This is where we take care of each other, where we help each other out. We do not try to backstab them with all the different rules. Thank you.
Listen, we will not have clapping after each speaker. You can raise your hands, but we're not going to clap after each speaker. We've gone down this road before.
That's sort of a First Amendment.
Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Board. Beth Whitkey, D5. I gave up trying to fix my D2 property. It's mothballed. All my building materials burned in the fire. My house stands, but I can't find a builder to go out there. I'm on a 2-year waiting list with the guys that helped me start it. So, took my Butte settlement and I bought property somewhere other than my farm. I think that this is all the cost of a ban. The board needs to start being honest and stop hiding behind these lies. The update to 8.06 is happening because the board chose to adopt the ban and eliminated all cannabis revenue. Supervisor Mills, are you listening to me? Because you never look when people are talking, and I'd like to have your attention.
Could we have council stop with the gesticulation and just observe and serve our needs?
Sir,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, so in fiscal year 17-18, the code enforcement didn't have any general fund subsidy because it was completely funded by cannabis registration fees. Now in fiscal year 18-19, code enforcement is $366,186 hit to the general fund. This is a direct cost of the ban. The recommended budget was adopted last month. It says on page 181, quote, a major loss of funding for code compliance is the termination of cannabis regulatory program. 3 full-time employee code enforcement officers were brought on due to the regulatory program. Currently, code compliance has 1 senior code enforcement officer, 5 code enforcement officers, and 1 permit tech. 2. While we are not requesting additional full-time employees, we are requesting we retain the staffing levels we have now despite the loss of funding. The requested general fund contribution is $366,186 would be needed to help code enforcement ramp up the 8.06 program in 18-19. End quote. The building department needs new revenue without fees from cannabis regulation. They need to find an alternative revenue source. On May 22nd, 2018, Ed Short said, quote, I think when the ban ended, or we have ran out of regulatory money, and we have literally a lot of code enforcement to do there, so we had to figure a way to start coming up with comprehensive approach, with ellipses, end quote. Last year, the taxpayers didn't have their tax dollars used to fund code department. This year, now that there is a ban and no more cannabis fees are now normal person's taxes, the funding and salaries of the additional hires code enforcement added for cannabis 8.06 is a consequence of the loss of funding and the desperate need to find alternative revenue. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Dean from D2. Okay. All of the language about cannabis should be removed. We already have a ban ordinance that is included by reference. The language regarding cannabis is either redundant or problematic and should be removed. That's it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Board. Helen Patterson from D2. This 8.06 update creates an incredibly punitive code enforcement regime. This ordinance will significantly increase the authority and the powers of code enforcement officers, dramatically expand and increase fees, drastically reduce due process, and to top it off, the fines are the icing on the cake. The update to 8.06 includes 7 new public nuisances that are not in the current 8.06. The term fee or fees appear 7 times in the current 8.06. The new updated version term appears 83 times. 5 new fees have been created. Additional fines have also been added and significantly increased to $100. The Board of Supervisors, CAO Lutz, Building Director Ed Short, and the new 8.06 make it abundantly clear the long-term solution to structure deficit is extract fees and fines from the citizens. The fourth whereas say the new 8.06 is intended to reduce and eventually eliminate the need for subsidy from the general fund through introduction of a fee schedule, provide additional prejudgment, fine collection tools. 8.06.415 fees. A, intent. It is the intent of the Board of Supervisors that the Department of Code Compliance, to the extent allowable under applicable law, maximize cost recovery associated with enforcement of the county code and state statutes incorporated herein, and that the expense of administrating a code compliance program be borne by those who are responsible for code violations and associated nuisances. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Glenn Malliette, District 2. I'm a lifetime resident of the county. I grew up here. I hope to raise my kid here too, but he needs a future. We elected people to provide sustainable solutions for future benefit of everyone. Where are those sustainable solutions? What we have here is a stopgap measure that is punitive in nature with a good cause. We need to clean up the county, but we don't need regulations that create more problems than they solve. My background is in professional engineering, water quality engineering. I've worked for the Regional Water Board. I last interviewed for the State Water Board Office of Cannabis Enforcement. I'm qualified to enforce the cannabis laws of the state. Yet, 3 of you in the board decided I'm too much of a risk to be allowed to grow cannabis at my home. Why? Because of fear-mongering. Fear-mongering. We need sustainable futures, and we need clear thought. We need to get down to what's really true and cast aside dispersions of what's not. We need to get to the truth, and we need sustainable solutions, not involving punitive actions by our elected servants. We expect you to serve us, every one of us. You swore to serve all of us. And I would wager that 3 of you did not. We need sustainable future. We don't need stronger code enforcement laws. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Chris Junkelts, Mountain Ranch. The budget hearing made it perfectly clear that the long-term solution to the structural deficit is an increase in fee and cost recovery. The 806 update is part of a plan to create new resources of revenue by expediting the code enforcement process and implementing new fees and fines that will replace cannabis funds and the need for the general fund subsidies that code enforcement has today. The recommended budget on page 181 states, code compliance's main goal for the upcoming fiscal year is to become a self-sustaining department. With the adoption of the updated Chapter 8.06, the implementation of a new fee structure and more powerful fine collection tools, we expect to be able to eventually reach near full cost recovery. Additionally, with adequate staffing levels and training, code compliance will have an improved ability to provide the level of service our constituents expect and deserve, investigating more complaints of all types, issuing more citations, and executing more abatement warrants. We expect each code enforcement officer to execute 3 non-cannabis abatement warrants. In regards to cannabis, it is the goal of the department to issue 300 citations for cannabis cultivation. An enforcement sweep of this level will make a tremendous impact and likely be a deterrent to future illegal cannabis cultivation, end quote. Code compliance main goal is to become self-sustaining this year. This goal is expected to be accomplished through a quota system for every code enforcement officer who will be expected to issue a specific number of abatement warrants as part of a systematic policy of selective enforcement and more powerful code collection tools. What happens if this succeeds, gentlemen? What do we do next year? Do we find new sources? Do we find new violations? I'm sure Supervisor Oliveira, coming from law enforcement, realizes we could hire enough highway patrolmen to stop carpool violations. We could stop every single person in the carpool lane with an officer, and that officer would have a job for about a week. After that point, there would be no way to raise the revenue to pay for those 1,000 officers we hired because carpool violations would cease. This is not the way we solve this problem, and it's not fair to the people of the county.
Hello, Jessica Clofran from District 1. A
strong fear that I have is selective enforcement, and whether this was made or created with ill intent, I'm worried that it will be used with ill intent. The new 8.06 eliminates planning commission appeals and subjects everyone to the new appeal process. Sounds like that this was developed to deal with cannabis cases. This is what's being referred to as the uniform and comprehensive approach, meant to eliminate the dual-track process of dealing with cannabis code violations separately from regular code violations. We all know a variety of code violations that there are to encounter, some of which are more comprehensive than others and should require better representation. And also to take note that, now applying all 6 plants outdoors, a need for abatement, just so that's on public record, because I think that's a very large misnomer that many people don't know. The new appeals process under 806, in addition to treating everyone like a pot grower, also continues a cost-prohibitive appeal process. The addition of the new case management, investigation, attorney fees, on top of the $500 fee for appeals, creates a disincentive on the part of the people with valid appeals for their exercising their due process rights, because they cannot afford to prove their case, right or wrong. This creates a regressive and punitive policy that will most impact the poor, disabled, elderly, veterans, and let's not forget the hundreds of families with the Butte Fire victims that are strongly going to be affected by this, that are already struggling. Per note to the dual track, I did not witness dual track being implemented because I had a cannabis farm and had compliance visitations and discussed with that, but I also had a shipping container that was personal on my property and was refused, even when asked, to have that removed from my cannabis violation. So I saw no dual track as many other farmers. So once again, it's our concern of having consistent enforcement. This is a good example of how the county has created a tool, new rules, staffing, specific person, then shut down the revenue stream that was funding it. Now redirecting these sources to the rest of the public in order to replace the lost revenue. So if you really think this is about going after the growers, like some of your supervisors are telling people, ask yourself, why are non-cannabis cases being subject to the same rules that were developed to expedite cannabis appeals? Uniform, comprehensive, streamline, these sound like buzzwords. Uniform means treat all like pot growers. Streamline and comprehensive means more fines, more fees, and less due process. I would hold anyone who supports this responsible for knowing and understanding the use of illegal and sneaky selective enforcement that is being used in this county. I would also not doubt the legal ramifications that could be held against it. We should be helping our community with any violations, helping them get back into compliance, helping them get into better statures, rather than creating either a more difficult, a more unknown, or a more financially struggled process for people that are already in financial struggle. Thank you.
Any other public comments?
Marty Crane. So when we first started this study session this afternoon, I heard a statement that, well, this has been written and what was the term you used? It was something about has risen to the level of hysteria. In other words, we're crazy. We don't know what we're reading. We're too stupid. We just can't understand this. Perhaps it wasn't written clear enough, or perhaps the people understand all too clearly what it is saying. So I'm, again, grateful for the amazing expertise that comes from our community and always comes here to inform our board. I keep hearing the concerns about selective enforcement and punitive, and I'm thinking, I remember not so long ago, a different configuration of this board, when there was a hot batch asphalt plant being pushed on the middle of a neighborhood. And I believe it was 6 different appeals were filed. Well, that costs money. It used to cost $100 to file an appeal. And they had tried everything to get the attention of their supervisors and the county board as a whole. Nothing worked. They were insulted, they were called elites and economic terrorists by their elected official. And so they got nowhere. So they filed and they decided, okay, we got to file appeals. So that's what they did. And the very next week, I believe it was, they came back and raised the appeals from 100 to 500 with an additional 100 for something else. $600. So I'm just saying, it's not without, in the realm of being possible, you know. We just have to be, we're gun shy here, you know. So, like, I'm not going to repeat what everyone else has said because they said it so beautifully and I could never do that. But please, take to heart what you're hearing.
Good afternoon, board. My name is Raymond Smith. I'm from Valley Springs. My background is in medicine. I used to be a caregiver, and I do believe that what affects one person in the community will affect everybody in the greater community. So that's why I've done great extent in reading the 806 down to the definitions. I've found 3 separate definitions of commercial cannabis activity: commercial cultivation, commercial cannabis cultivation, which is an activity, commercial cultivation activity, commercial cultivation activities. The state law for commercial cultivation activity is defined in Business Code per Senate Bill 94, or Maui Cruza. And it's very disturbing to me that we have a state law that is clearly defined and we're trying to write our own laws. If I was indifferent to state law, I would be called an outlaw. I'm not sure what we would call our council here. I do have some other problems with the enforcement of the $250 fine for each cannabis plant that is found to be in commercial cultivation, because you're defining everything over 6 plants as commercial cultivation. That's not how state law has it. There's actually an exemption that I have, I know it on the back of my hand. It's Business Code 26033. That's an exemption for cannabis patients and caregivers, up to 5 patients for each caregiver, and each patient, there is no quantification there. There was no quantification given. It was rewritten. You can go ahead and read that. If you went ahead and enforced this, it would be over $1,000 just for this fee right here. There's also a bill going through the California Senate right now. It passed the House unanimously to ban what are called prosecution fees from you guys getting outside assistance from outside counsel to prosecute people. There was a case in 29 Palms, I think, California, where they pushed a case on a 91-year-old with dementia, who's dying of dementia. She had passed, and they passed on the fines to her family. And she was supposed to pass that land on to her family. Well, you know, that's not going to happen, I don't think. I'm not sure if that's the way that we want to go for Calaveras. There's a couple other things that I have that are really important besides these definitions, and they go into the $1,000 a day fines, which I believe are clearly, Kirby versus Fresno is very clear that it's not only superseding, state law does not only supersede this area, it is fully occupying the criminalization and the regulation of personal use of cannabis. So
Thank you.
I'll follow up with my recommendation. Have a beautiful day.
Good afternoon, Jason Campbell, District 5. Here's an email from one of Clyde Clapp's former tenants dated February 9th, 2017, 3:21 p.m. The 657 square foot garage I was living in was misrepresented by Clyde Clapp as a 900 square foot guest home. I was threatened and forced to sign a statement that said I did not pay rent for 2 months and didn't give a proper 30-day notice. I notified them that I was moving and was withholding rent for the reasons of it not being permitted as a legal dwelling and pending litigation involving the property they neglected to inform me of prior to renting. February 14th, 2017 regular meeting, number 23, code compliance. Introduce and waive reading of the ordinance superseding and replacing the current chapter 806 of the Calaveras County Code, Public Abatement Property Maintenance Code, 8.06.040, responsibility. Unless otherwise specified herein, the owner and or the owner's designated agent, assignee, occupant, tenant, persons in charge of premises, or operators on a premises shall be responsible for the maintenance of the premises and shall maintain the premises in compliance with this chapter. A person shall not occupy as owner-occupant or permit another person to occupy premises that are not in a sanitary and safe condition and which do not comply with the requirements of this chapter. Owners and designated agents, assignees, occupants, tenants, persons in charge of premises, or operators on premise shall be jointly and severely liable to perform any and all actions and pay all costs, fees, or fines in compliance with this chapter. I would also like to say that I'm not experiencing a dual track method with code compliance. I got an abatement order for the 4 hoops that I had in my cultivation area. I only have 2 people, just myself and one other person that works with me, so it took us a while to get them down. I went in on a Friday. My 10th day was on a Sunday. I tried to submit evidence, and they saw another violation in the photographic evidence. They told me all my abatement notices stand, didn't offer me any kind of extension, anything like that. So they handed me everything back and said, go to your hearing. Lies. Too many lies, too many inconsistencies, too much selective enforcement. Also, like I said, I get it. You guys don't like me because I chose to grow cannabis. Some of you, it doesn't matter what you do. I'm not going anywhere. You're not getting rid of me.
Hello, my name's Robert Scott. I'm a former homeowner and now landowner in Mountain Ranch. I want to address the idea of the code compliance as a revenue source and the fact that one of the main points has been making it cost recovery. And so I have a question about the cost recovery part. I've worked for 25 years on the energy efficiency components of the California Building Code. And one thing I know about is that enforcement comes through compliance is something that is a paper thing. It's something that happens. And compliance is very hard to come by. So my question is, what is the relationship and what is the division of revenue from compliance on code, on permits, and revenue from enforcement and punitive actions? I think, has there been a cost test done? Is there any financials that have been done on this? The fee structure is not even available, so I think it's very difficult to understand what is the actual cost of doing this 806 change. So I guess I would ask you, is there a financial analysis that we could look at, because there's nothing that tells us what is the real impact? We could go back to 2006 and say, let's do a study and look at what is the income and what is the expenses that are caused through the Building and Enforcement Office. And I would go back to 2006 and take it to today, because I know that there was certainly a drop in the 2007 to 2009 timeframe, and that's going to happen again, because then your code, are we going to lose, how many new construction projects are we going to have, how many remediations, retrofits, and even the ones that you'll never find out about, replacing equipment, mechanical systems. I think you'll stand to drive the economy further underground on things that you really want to make legitimate. So I think we ought to think about what are the financial aspects of this, because I don't think they've been thought through all the way. We don't know what those numbers are. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Cynthia Sanchez, and I am a citizen and taxpayer of Calaveras County. As a property owner, I never remember voting on this proposed ordinance. In addition, I never received a letter from the planning department referencing that this proposed ordinance was coming down the pipeline. Since the property owners, taxpayers, are the ones picking up the tab on this proposed ordinance, the taxpayers need to vote on this and not have it forced upon us without our knowledge. Imposing a tax, a new tax, or revising an existing ordinance should be decided by the taxpayers, not by the politicians that write the proposal and who are the ones that will profit from it. Not only will the entire county suffer from this proposed ordinance, the Butte Fire victims are victimized once again. Let's put the puzzle pieces together. Let's look at the continual harassment of the taxpayers, mainly the Butte Fire victims. Number one, we were burnt out. A percentage of the residents moved and a percentage stayed to rebuild. Number two, we were extorted into signing the debris removal program. We were not given a choice. Number three, the county then harassed the property owners that had homeowners insurance to collect the debris removal proceeds from our insurance policies instead of the $4,000, which was approximately 10% of the cleanup costs that were stated by Cal Recycle on September 24th, 2015. The county hired Tetra Tech to badger the property owners to collect 100% of their debris removal money to cover the costs of the property owners who did not have insurance. I'm not a welfare department. Number four, FEMA fully covered the cleanup of the Butte fire. The county is double dipping, not the property owners. Number five, the tree removal program, another way for the county to extort even more money from the property owners. Number six, a large percentage of the Butte fire victims were then hit with an increase in their property taxes last December, an increase between 13 and 86%. Some people's, their taxes doubled. I lost 10 structures on my property. My taxes increased 58%. Now, number seven, now you, the county, wants to propose an ordinance that will tax every structure on the property, taxing the people into oblivion. Oh, in addition, let's see, the county had a surplus of 20 million. They now have a deficit, 11 million. They now have a deficit of 9 million. Okay. Finally, our forefathers put the Constitution in place to prevent the government from this kind of taxation. When the people are overtaxed and over-regulated, there is no freedom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. 3:15. Compliance. What is compliance in this county? We were told when we came here almost 10 years ago that if we put up a 6-foot fence and grew less than 99 plants, had medical cards for all of the plants, that we were compliant. We did exactly that. Exactly what the sheriff told us, planning told us, building told us, code compliance told us. You want a shipping container? Put it on your property. It's a good storage container. We're not permitting them. You don't have to get a permit. Don't do anything. But you're in compliance with the new 806. Am I in compliance now? If I have 6 plants outdoors, I'm against the ban. Last year we had 120 plants. We had to destroy most of that product. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much. I think that's a great idea. That was a great plan. Collect $13 million from growers and then ban 8 days into regulation, making all of that product that wasn't able to be moved in the state legal market, now black market. You have created the largest boom to the black market of this county has seen in 40 years. There's more marijuana around here now. There's 1,000 illegal grows that you were told about when you came into office. Did you ignore them? Yes, you did. Only 25 were eradicated by the sheriff's department. Some less than 200 by this same code compliance. Now you're going to go out and count containers, shipping containers. What about if they're under a roof next to a barn, used for storage and tack? They have to be on a foundation? What if you have a solar cell running an electric light in there? You have to have a permit for that? Do you need fees for everything that we do? Are we in compliance? Can we ever be in compliance with the county code? Not the way this county seems to be running. Once you're in compliance, people just want to change the code. So then you're out of compliance. Now it's time to pay the piper again. How many people do you think want to come into Calaveras County and start a business? Build a business? Do anything in Calaveras County? Next thing you know, their business will be shut down, just like everybody else's. There's more empty buildings on this street as you come through San Andreas today than there are full ones. Thank you, gentlemen. Great job.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. This is just as hard for us as it is for you, I'm sure. I wanted to share a personal experience I had with Mr. Short, but I wanted to say a couple things first. You know, some days, some politicians or elected officials will find a positive way to incentivize what they think they're trying to have happen instead of negative. So think about a positive instead of always punitive. Number two, Kool-Aid. I think you guys got to be careful of drinking the Kool-Aid of revenue neutral concepts. It's just something that doesn't always work out the way you want, and most likely it won't. Trying to think that it's an answer to the budgetary problems because you've lost income elsewhere. Also, I'd like to say ditto to what's been said before. There's some very impressive, heartfelt comments, so I'd like to comment on that. You know, just an interesting thought. Maybe all the county appointed and elected officials should go through the process first of code compliance and see how that works. You know, I think you should try it on for size. I'm willing to go down that path with you, but I certainly don't want to, you know, lead the horse and carry the cross. I think it should be something that everybody goes through, including those who are writing this. Now, I had a personal experience as I was trying to get a greenhouse permit recently, and I was working on a grading permit, a greenhouse permit. I had to get a house permit before I could get some greenhouses, which took a year. By that time, there was no time to get to the scale of operation that I needed to be successful. Anyway, I went in to get a 100-day extension on a greenhouse permit that had gotten approved. And it was reaching the end of its time, and I was certainly, guilty of being slow. But on the form it says, write the reason that's out of your control that is why we should give you an extension. And I put on there political instability. The day that I went in, it was between the ban having been passed but not effective. It hadn't gotten extended 30 days either, and there was also a pending litigation for injunction or a stay. Well, Mr. Short and one of the associates, and I won't name any names except Mr. Short, came back and said that, Mr. Clay, that is not something that's out of your control. Truth. This is truth. I have the form. I knew there was something wrong at that point. And I think one of the previous speakers talked about, take a good look at the building department and make sure you're doing it right. Thank you.
Any other public comments?
Michael Falvey, District 2. I have a confession to make. I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, okay? I'm having trouble wrapping my head around this proposal. I thought the initial 806 was a really good idea, back in the day. But this new reincarnation, it kind of worries me. I'm not an economic expert. I'm not a law expert. I don't study these things as much as a lot of people do, mainly because, it doesn't affect me that much. But this new 806, one observation, I haven't seen and I'll characterize here, I haven't seen one ban proponent speak up in public comment yet. Maybe I'm wrong, but I haven't seen one saying this is a bad law or a good law. They don't have any comment on it. But
Quiet,
I want my time stopped. I want my time stopped, and I object to that woman continuously.
I've hammered her down, she's out of order, continue.
I want her ejected.
She's fine, continue. She's out of order, you need to remain quiet. I will kick you out.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, we're gonna take a 5-minute break.
Hey, I have my 3 minutes.
5 minute break.
I have my
You
3.
have your time, you have the remainder of your time. 5-minute break.
This is blasphemous. She is allowed to do this over and over again.
Can you close the doors, please?
Yeah, I was hoping we could turn up the air a little bit out there. It's kind of a greenhouse effect. It really heats up out there.
Hold your tongue. Don't exhale.
All right, we're going to continue, and I'm going to set the rules for continuing for the rest of this day, and then we're going to go, hopefully next week we have things posted, what I've been asking for in the back. And if you want to have your comments, you have 2 choices. You can take them outside, take your comments outside unless you're up here at public comment period, or you can be asked to leave and be taken out. But we're not going to continue this way. Everybody that's standing up here at the podium during public comment has the right to speak their mind on what they want to speak of without having to hear anybody else complain about what they are saying. So either conform to that and respect them in this room and this board conducting business, county business, or pick it up and leave or be asked to leave. But we're not going to continue this way. And that goes for both sides and all sides. If you have one comment going forward from here and I hear it, I'm going to be asking you to leave. That's it. We're trying to conduct business here at the county level, and that's why we're here. So you have the right to speak your mind at the podium when it's public comment, and you have the right at that time speaking your comments to have quiet from everybody and not hear somebody say something about what you're saying. That's not right. So we're going to go forward, and that's the ground rules from here. Thank you.
Before I was interrupted by an unethical, rude person, I was stating that I thought it was interesting that I hadn't heard any ban proponents speak on this issue. I'm, if you know my history, I'm not proponent or for this regulation 100%. I'm not either one. I'm a concerned citizen. What worries me about this 8.06 is that once you get rid of all the evil marijuana growers, all the evil cannabis growers, you have to keep up a program like this to keep these funds coming in. I'm retired, disabled, on a fixed income, and I don't need anything coming down on me that's unexpected. Are you going to come after me next after you get rid of all the evil cannabis growers? Are you going to come after the everyday citizens of Calaveras County that might have a C-van that has been on their property for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years? I mean, what's after you rid Calaveras County of the evil that you think inhabits it? You're going to be...
You need to be quiet, or you're going to be asked to leave.
Are you going to, is the board and code compliance going to come after me? That's kind of what I'm concerned about. Are they going to come after you, Mr. Clapp, Mr. Mills, Oliveira, Garamendi, Tofinelli? There's a C-van behind the Red Barn. There's a C-van back there. Are you going to go after them? Is code compliance going to go after them? I'm a member of the Calaveras County Historical Society Board of Directors, and I'm going to have to talk to people, say, hey, we might get cited here before we know it. Are you going to go after them? Or just one particular group? But when you run out of that group, if you harass them enough where they just throw up their hands, are you coming after me next?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Justin Catalano, West Point. 8.06 is a recipe for selective enforcement and litigation. This 8.06 is an affront to the people of Calaveras County and our constitutional rights. This update to the county code tramples all over our property rights, our privacy rights, our due process rights, and our right to equal protection under the law. For example, the new 8.06 allows for the following. Summary abatement authority without notice. 8.06.560. Summary abatement authority. A. Whether the building official determines that a substantial violation exists which constitutes an immediate threat to the public health and safety and requires immediate correction or elimination, the building official may exercise the following powers without issuance of a notice of violation or administrative citation and order to the owner or occupants. 8.06.565, summary assessment of administrative fines, amount of fine, and appeal hearings. A. Where a serious code violation or public nuisance in the judgment of the building official poses an immediate danger to health and safety, then no reasonable period of time need be provided to abate a continuing violation or nuisance condition prior to the issuance of an abatement order or assessment of administrative fines. The intent here is to fund code enforcement with prejudgment fine collection tools. Whereas the Replacement Property Maintenance and Code Enforcement Procedures Code is intended to reduce and eventually eliminate the need for subsidy from the general fund through introduction of a fee schedule, provide additional prejudgment fine collection tools, allow for more efficient and superior service to the community, and to implement more effective and efficient code enforcement practices. The approved budget for fiscal year 1890 indicates the plan is to gear up a selective enforcement program under the new 8.06. We expect each code enforcement officer to execute 3 non-cannabis abatement warrants. In regards to cannabis, it is the goal of the department to issue 300 citations for cannabis cultivation. An enforcement sweep of this level will make a tremendous impact and likely to be a deterrent for the future illegal cannabis cultivation. As written, the new 8.06 creates an enforcement program that lends itself to the abuse of power and litigation. As Fresno County just found out, in the Thao versus Fresno County decision, a strategy of punitive fines without due process is inconsistent with the state law and will not stand in a court of law. This board should reconsider.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Caitlin Ortega, District 2. My concern with this issue is that I'm looking at the board that approved the initial ordinance, correct, in 2017? And what is the motivation for the revisions to this? The intention, it seems, is financial. I believe this is not a very good, strong financial picture for our future, as it doesn't include operating and maintenance costs. I think you all are intelligent men and can figure this out and understand that this is the wrong way to go. I think you hear the passion from our community that we don't want to pay for your mistakes. You led us down this path, and here we are. But I'm here to say I'm an optimist. I believe in you. I believe you can fix this for us, and I can believe that you can do that without, in part, destroying the financial stability of the already impoverished people in this county. You can't get blood out of a turnip, so if you're not going to go down the route of putting liens on properties, how are you going to, accrue your costs, your maintenance costs? Are you going to be people's taxing their paychecks? How are you going to recoup your money if you're not going to put liens on people's property? Where are you going to get the ongoing funding for this program? And what is the need for it? That's my question. What's wrong with the original 8.06 that you all voted for in 2017? That's all I have to say. I appreciate you serving this community. I just wish you could do a better job. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Allison Char-Smith. I'm the board president for the Mountain Ranch Youth Alliance and Resource Center. And I come today here representing the people that we represent with the food pantry program, the Mountain Ranch Resource Center, that will be unaffected by this new ordinance of 806. We currently we serve 108 residents of the Mountain Ranch area with this. And these people have lost a lot. These people are living in campers. They do not have kitchens. They have stoves or crock pots to feed themselves. And so I feel that this is just another division of the county. We speak about the ban ordinance and how it has divided the county and District 2 specifically. But this has actually divided us as the citizens against you if you pass this. This will unduly affect all citizens of this county, and we feel that this is strongly not in the right interest of all county members. Thank you.
My name is Marilyn Schroff, and I am a resident of District 2 in West Point. And I first heard of this yesterday via Facebook, not by any official notification, not by any outreach. And it struck me as I've listened today, that, it's all wrapped up with a marijuana ban, and that's somewhat clouding the situation. Whether you feel like that was right or wrong, that was a loss of an income stream, and this provision is trying to make up that loss. And when you say a $330,000 budget, that's today. It'll be more next year, and more the year after that. And what you're proposing here is that the citizens of this county are going to pay, and this is a tax, by the way. This is a tax. You could call it a fee, but it's a tax. $330,000 is a lot of fees and fines. And the people that are going to be most affected by this are people in District 2. District 2, rural, spread out. Where do you think the woodsheds are? Where are the chicken coops? Where are the storage containers? Because we need places to put our tools. We need places to put our wood. All of those things, you could probably go all over District 2 and find everybody out of compliance with code. And a lot of those people are very, very poor. So when you start fining them, they're going to end up losing their property. And you're going to look like really heartless people for having done this. All so that you can add 3 more positions to code compliance. That does not seem like a reasonable posture to me, and it does not seem kind either. Thank you.
I'm Lucinda Weaver from District 2, and there are just too many unknowns. The public is completely in the dark about all of the changes happening in the building department, and here are just the ones we know of. Building fees have increased 300%. Changes have been made to the way the code regarding driveways is being interpreted. 30-foot setbacks are now being enforced. Seismic analysis is being required for no reason. Shipping containers now require permits, unless you talk to Gary, who will tell you those rules only apply to pot growers. The building department and the planning department believe the emergency state order allowing Butte fire survivors to stay on their property, to remain on their property, no longer exists. No longer applies. In January, greenhouses and temporary ag structures were eliminated. More than one shed on a property zoned U without a residence is now a code violation. All plan check is being outsourced. Who knows what else has been changed and how it will affect property owners with the revisions to the code creating punitive penalties and the directive to maximize revenues as written in 806. What is the actual fee schedule, and how much will the fines actually be? How much will an average code violation cost? How much will an appeal cost? How much will it cost if the appeal lost? There are too many unknowns. There's too great a potential for unintended consequences. And there is no need to update or adopt this without all the facts.
I want to thank all the pot growers present and historical for bringing us to this place. Once in America, our houses and our lands were considered private property, and there wasn't such things as what has been told here. And but now, thanks to pot, we get to live with Gestapo rules. And that's just the bottom line. You know, that's what it's brought. And we'll all have to live under it. But I don't like it. And my ancestors don't like it. And I'm really sorry.
Benjamin Stopper, District 5. There's been many very good thoughts shared today with you all. I want to discuss the fee schedule that's not done yet. The fact that it's not attached to the 8.06. And Ethan, I really believe that you're trying to do the best for the county, but I find it disingenuous when you say that the fees are not going to cost more in the future, because you don't even know what those are yet, because the fee schedule is not there. To go on, I believe Janice Bassett brought up very good that you know, we are not building the houses we used to. The permit fees have gone up through the roof in the last year, based on something that was passed long before any of these. Well, actually, Gary, I think you were on the board back when they actually did this rate study and voted on it. But Ed's trying to follow this rate study that was passed by a past board that hadn't been followed in years. And we need a new nexus study done on these permit fees, because you're chasing new building out of this county. The reason the building department used to be self-sustaining in the past. Why? We're building 700-800 houses a year in Calaveras County prior to 2007. Now we go down to 100, and you want to raise permit fees and pull in more money off of code compliance fines, because look, if we build 100 houses here a year and we still have the same building department we used to have that could, look, and salaries cost more than what they used to, substantially, you're never going to recover that through 100 homes being built in a year. I'm not saying open up the doors and let's build 2,000 houses a year, but this is what was sustaining. So what happens during the next economic depression? All of a sudden we go down to 0 houses built a year. What, one person builds a house a year. Do they have to support the whole building department through their permit fee? It doesn't make sense, because it's only the cost of what it takes to facilitate that process. And when I want to rebuild my back deck on my house because it's starting to rot off my house, you know, and they come in and say, your deck's not safe. You have to remove your deck and rebuild it. I have to pay, what, $2,300 to rebuild a deck that was already there? The engineering costs less than that. This is insane. We're outsourcing plan checking. It costs more to outsource plan checking. These processes were facilitated in-house, and we're able to carry it on our own prior to marijuana being here and everything else.
Thank you.
Hi, name's Lisa Muter-Keys. I have a few disclosures to make before I speak. I am the chair of the Planning Commission. I am not speaking as a planning commissioner. I also am a real estate broker. I am not speaking for the Realtors Association. I'm speaking for myself. I read through the ordinance. I'm looking at side notes that are attached to this ordinance and changes that were made before we ever got here. Page 28 ET6, a supervisor's change was made. Did all 5 of you have that opportunity? How did that happen? In ET3, there was a June 4th public meeting with an industry group. Was it advertised? Did anybody know about it? Are we going to have a public meeting? Are we going to advertise it to the public? Because I think this is not a cannabis issue. This is a county-wide enforcement issue on all of us. And cannabis goes away because we have a ban, but we still have a selective enforcement issue going on here. Why is cannabis in this? Why doesn't cannabis have its own ordinance? 8.06 was created long before we were enforcing cannabis. 8.06 was here to enforce code violations for everybody, fairly, across the board. If you want to create a selective issue for the ban and for code enforcement, do it separately. It doesn't belong in here. I'm really struggling with a lot of things that have been done in here. I'm reading the fees, but you can't decipher that because we don't have a fee schedule. What the hell is that? I'm asking you right now, all of you, do not vote on this. And if you're going to, we've had and spent $1 million on cannabis meetings. Have a public meeting. Let us all come. Let us all speak and tear this thing apart. Don't give us 5 days notice. Thank you.
Neil McEwen, District 2. The building department plans to operate code enforcement as an enterprise fund. This means the entire department will operate off the revenue they generate from code enforcement actions and the fees and fines that they produce. According to Ethan Turner, at the May 22nd Board of Supervisor meeting in fiscal year 17-18, cannabis registration fees funded code enforcement activities. Gary Tofinelli in the same meeting said code enforcement has always been independent of the general fund. However, Ed Short contradicted Gary's statement and said that code enforcement has historically operated in the red and required some general fund monies to backfill the shortfall. It is important that people know the historic code enforcement department that Ed is referring to consisted of 2 code enforcement officers. Over the last 2 years, code enforcement has been expanded significantly, and it is these new staffing levels that the reorganized code enforcement department is expecting to maintain with these changes. Now code enforcement means 5 code enforcement officers, $74,000 each, 1 lawyer, $93,000 each, $93,000, and one or more administrative hearing officer at $60,000, who will now be charged with administering and collecting over $500,000 in fines annually just to pay for their salaries. Shifting away from cannabis funds to an enterprise fund cost recovery model based on fees and fines is a strategy of diminishing returns. Instead of regulating the cannabis industry and using the tax revenue to improve the community, or prioritizing a revamped and streamlined building code and permit process for rebuilding or building new housing stock, improving property values and increasing tax revenues, thereby creating additional annual revenue for the building department, instead of targeting existing housing stock and properties through a strategy of proactive code enforcement, streamlined appeals with various tools compel cost recovery. These are one-time funds that have proven difficult, if not impossible, to completely capture, and which provide relatively limited value added to the community.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Al Segala, Taxpayer Association. I don't think this is really a cannabis issue. It seems to be a regulatory issue having to do with code compliance. And what would happen if there was no code compliance? Would 1,000 people die? 10 people die? One person die? Would 1,000 people get sick? 100 people get sick? 10 people get sick? One person gets sick? Maybe we don't need someone's code compliance. We need to ask the question, what's the purpose of government? Is it to run people's lives? If it's to run people's lives, we're in the wrong country, because our Constitution calls for the purpose of government to be protecting people's basic rights, which are life, liberty, and property. Our Taxpayer Association got a copy of Colleen Platt's letter, and it seemed to be pretty good. And we usually we're surprised. We don't normally agree with her, but she hit the nail on the head. And she's supporting property rights, and I think it's just beautiful. Well, anyway, back to the Constitution. The Fifth Amendment to the Constitution says that nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. And if we go to the 14th Amendment to the same Constitution, we find that no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So clearly, government's purpose is to protect those rights of life, liberty, and property. Okay, so what about regulation? What's the purpose of regulation? Well, it would seem that the only logical purpose of regulation in a free society would be protecting the public safety. Okay, our building official structure is built on that. Ooh,
Thank you, Al.
I only got started. Thank you.
Oh, this is perfect, coming in after Al, apropos of the Constitution. I want you guys to consider some of the things that are in this ordinance. .070, Administrative Enforcement Authority. The building official has the authority and powers necessary to determine whether a nuisance or violation of the code exists. That is, a person on the ground gets to decide if there's a nuisance or not. Doesn't matter whether anybody's dying or not, or getting sick or not. They just get to decide it's a nuisance. Summary Abatement Authority, how about that? This is .560. A, whenever the building official determines that a substantial violation exists, which constitutes an immediate threat to the public health and safety and requires immediate correction or elimination, the building official may exercise the following, and I'll put in, unconstitutional powers. Without issuance of a notice of violation or administrative citation, on the spot, this is what they can do. Order tenants, employees, or any other occupants to immediately vacate the premises. On the spot, get out of your house. Number 4, raise and grade and the immediately hazardous portion of the building or site, prevent further collapse, and remove the hazard to the general public. Remove junk, debris, chemical containers, objects, or items constituting attractive nuisances, whatever that is, or physical hazards. On the spot. No hearing, no warning, no constitutional rights whatsoever afforded to the people who own that property. They can walk in there and do stuff to people because they decide it's a nuisance. Now, I don't know what country you guys live in, but that's not the United States of America. And what I find really fascinating, and I'm going to echo what Chili Mac said, is that we have a certain segment of this population here for the ban, and they're okay with these violations of the Constitution because they're not saying a word today. They say they're for rural life. They're not. They want you guys to destroy it. .050, definitions of public nuisance. Any conditions or practice that violates county ordinances, regardless of how the condition was created or whether it was permitted, a permit was initially required, including any activity that moves soils or substantially alters pre-existing vegetation. Grading, digging, cutting, scraping, unless such activity is undertaken pursuant to a grading permit issued by the Public Works Department. Again, this is overreach. These guys shouldn't be allowed to decide what a nuisance is. I've been in my place for 5 years and I didn't bother anybody, and you declared me a nuisance.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Jed Richardson, Mountain Ranch. I'm here this afternoon to give you 5 reasons to postpone enactment of the revised 8.06, reasons which any of you could use. Inadequate public notice. A regular meeting of the Building Department Advisory Board advertised only on a Building Department website is not adequate for gathering public comment. 2, inadequate supervisor involvement in decisions. While code enforcement has said they will copy supervisors on notices, that's not what 8.06 says. 3, cannabis code violations apply to non-growers. For example, light pollution, originally enacted for illuminating greenhouses at night. My neighbor's outdoor lights illuminate my house and property at night. Should I turn them in? 4, no defined fees and fines. At this time, the fee schedule, which is a critical portion of this revision, is not available. We need that information to make an informed decision. 5, self-funding of a department staffed for cannabis enforcement. The introduction to this agenda item states that code compliance will be funded through fees and prejudgments, whatever that is. Not the sign of a kinder, gentler code compliance department. The whole premise of a self-funding should be rethought. For these reasons, you should call for additional public input in 8.06 revisions while waiting for the outside fee and fine study to be completed. Thank you.
Hi. I'm here to say that I do support the ban, and the reason I'm not speaking out on most agenda items is because I don't want to become the subject of intimidation and being suppressed again and not having my family come around because I've become a target. And that's the truth, and I don't care if people are clapping or making faces at me. I do appreciate a lot of the comments that have been made today. It's been educational for me. But I don't have any comments to make on 8.06. Thank you.
Point of order?
There's no point of order. There's no violation. There's no point of order. There's no violation. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Elaine St. John, and I'm from District 4. A lot of times I get up and I won't say my name because I've been videotaped by certain people. But anyway, I am here to let you know that I do support us updating 8.604, 806, yeah, there we go. My neighborhood has really become a very deteriorated neighborhood, and Supervisor Mills knows that because he's seen it personally. We have a lot of renters in our neighborhood, and we have some people that own homes. There's a gentleman down the street that his house has been red tagged twice. He breaks back into the house and he's living there. His name is Leonard, last name. My neighbor next door to me on the other side, right on the other side of my fence, built a fire in the middle of August and set it on fire. This particular guy, there was no fine. Fire trucks were out there that night, police were out there that night. The next day it was still burning. He was supposed to put it out. Fire trucks came again, and no fine. And he's going around bragging to people that he was never fined for the fire that could have caught the whole neighborhood on fire. This is the kind of thing that I appreciate, you guys, that you're concerned about regular citizens and people that, you know, that are renters.
Point of order? There's no point of order. No point of order, sir.
It has everything to do with the topic. We're talking about fines and what code compliance does. Code compliance is trying to take care of us, and you're trying to take care of us. And we just want a safe environment to live in. I don't want to live next door to somebody who starts fires. And I don't want to live down the street from somebody who's been red tagged, that has no water and no electricity. And you've been down there, and they've done a great job. But, you know, we need to make these fines stiffer. There's a lot of cars that are parked, and people are throwing mattresses and sofa beds in front of their house. And they need to be fined. There has to be some financial thing to help us clean this place up. Calaveras County is a beautiful place to live. But we're allowing people that don't have any skin in the game. What does somebody care that their renters are ruining a neighborhood unless they have skin in the game? So I support what you're doing. Thank you.
My name's Jennifer Smith. Elaine brings up a great point. What are we doing? We're fining people, we're red tagging people, people are starting fires, but they're not getting fined. They're sneaking back into red tagged houses. Seems to me like code compliance already has a full-time job that they're not doing completely. That being said, and a lot of this is repetitive, 8.06 creates a code enforcement regime that was developed against cannabis farmers. We know this. Mr. Tofinelli has stated it. Now this code enforcement regime is being unleashed on the rest of the public. Welcome to our hell that we have been living in. Welcome to selective enforcement, because that is exactly what you're putting on the citizens of this county. Bottom line, we have documented selective enforcement against cannabis farmers since October. So let's go. Let's put this in place, and let's give everybody the same responsibilities that we have. And I hope that everybody else's house is in order. The new fee structure, you guys have heard it from everybody else. Bottom line, selective enforcement's been happening. Gary, I think you need to recuse yourself based upon the statements you made to a citizen on the phone that have been repeated. I recommend that this item be held over and that you guys have a study session, because it's inappropriate for anybody to have a prejudiced opinion on this and continue to subject the rest of us to it. Thanks.
I'm Colin, Ryan Jack, District 3. I think you should bring this to your guys' constituents out there too. Really think about this. Think about this enforcement you're bringing to this county. Really think about it. Do you want neighbors churning on each other for unpermitted structures? Because this is what it's going to come to. I mean, it's going to come to that. You're going to get rid of all the cannabis growers, and then you're still going to have a code enforcement that's going to come around and try to enforce these taxations pretty much to people that have had to try to have creative minds and build onto their homes, maintenance their properties, their farms. You're rolling your eyes over there. Are you from here? You know? I mean, you guys are like, you're going to churn neighbors upon each other. And I mean, I've built decks in Arnold, Mike. You should go talk to some of your constituents up there and see if they got permits for them. And that goes for everyone on this board right here. There's been unpermitted structures up here for years. And you're going to go after the people from the Bay Area that bought these homes? You guys are going to go after, I can't even believe it anymore. All right, thank you.
Afternoon, Cliff Edson, San Andreas. First, let me say that I don't want to live next to somebody that wants to mind my business. That's why I bought property, so that I don't have to live like that. And especially having the government having their way in my business and in my property. That's not what government's for. This board created a decline in our economy, creating undue hardships for many businesses and citizens of this county. Now by creating 8.06, which was created for a totally different thing, actually. The level you demand, at this level, you demand more opportunity for greater fines that didn't previously exist. And it seems like you're trying to make up for your mistakes. And they are mistakes, and they will come out. Maybe not this year, but within 5 years, you'll find out. Your proposed 8.06 fee will put people into debt and degrade their rights of our own property and put undue hardships on people and businesses. Now I realize that none of you own a legitimate business here in Calaveras, so how would you know the impact? What about the many seniors that have containers that put their family heirlooms in? They don't have foundations. Are you going to permit them to? You're going to put undue stress on those people, and they don't need it. This is too much government, and this is tyranny. This is not a way to fund your upcoming shortfalls. We are a people that are trying to make a living and just want to live and work in this county. People like my family. That's why I got involved in government. And now after being on this board, creating opportunity for legitimate business, and after 13 years of running an honest business in Calaveras County, we are selling our business directly because of your policies that you created. Is this how our government is to represent us? I don't think so. Think long and hard about what your role is. Thank you.
Any other public comments?
Good afternoon, Board. I think we need to kind of compress this whole subject a little bit and go back to 2015 when AB 266 was coming down the pike. We knew what was going to happen. At that time, I warned the board, do not get involved in marijuana. This county is not ready for prime time. At the time, they voted 5-0 to do nothing. Since then, we've had two incarnations of the urgency ordinance that have failed. Enforcement is almost impossible. That with the combination of the Butte fire, which opened up new lands with people who were uninsured, ready to sell their property to the highest bidder, and there was a flood of growers coming in to take that land. It was the perfect storm. I was the contractor for 20 years. I was never able to build anything without first getting a permit. I didn't build the house and then go back and try to get the permit. And if I had done anything wrong along the way, it would have been red tagged. If I had continued, they would have reported me to the contractor's license board. I'd lost my license. I would have lost my insurance. I would have been out of business. I would have had no recourse. I'm tired of hearing about all the whining right now. I remember back when the building department shut down for a year. We had a building moratorium in this county, and that cleaned out just about every contractor that we had. Ever since marijuana has started this perfect storm, they have been dragging this county around behind the pickup truck, chained. I hope you guys are getting tired of being dragged around. And I see some hope that, first of all, you have enacted a ban. That's the first time you've even tried to get ahead of the problem. You've been behind it for over 3 years. And now you're going to change 8.06. You've been behind the 8 ball for a long time with that, even after the last change. Now you're doing something to get ahead of the game. The only way you're going to head off this stampede is to get ahead of it and not constantly reacting to it. You'll never catch up. You won't do it. Now you can say, that I don't know what I'm talking about, and maybe I don't. But I've been right so far. You keep chasing this problem, you're never going to catch it. It is going to eat this county up. It is going to eat our community up. We all have our laws and regulations to abide by. We gladly do it for the common good. And I'm glad to see that 8.06 has some distinction between regular code compliance and marijuana. Because they're such different problems. One product isn't going to fix it all. So I hope that you approve this. I hope that you move forward with it, and I congratulate you for finally getting ahead of this problem and doing something about it. I think we have hope. Thank you.
Hi there. You guys are about to implement 8.06, or you might not. I think before you fine or charge a fee to a single person in this county, you should go and look at the storage containers that this county owns. Get every single one of them on an engineered foundation. How about instead of fining the people in Mountain Ranch who are living in trailers, you get our DA asked to stop working from a trailer? How about that? That's all I gotta say.
Good afternoon. Mr. Tofanelli, Gary, don't worry, I know the struggles we are going through, but these are only temporary. These 8.06 changes were solely made to be directed toward cannabis farmers coming into compliance and getting things back to normal for normal folks like us. I get it, Ed overreacted with the whole shipping container thing. That was a dramatic overreaction, which is worth repeating. We understand, Gary, sometimes it's department heads overreacting before supervisors get a chance to see what's going on. You know what's going on, Gary. You know what Ed wants us to put on a foundation. But that's when you got to get involved. And that's why some of these things are changing, right? It was just a dramatic overreaction to things that were going on, but they were trying to control a different aspect of it. But as you've said, Gary, it will change, like the shipping containers and other things. But they are coming back into perspective for guys like you and me, right, Gary? And with all this cannabis stuff, we will see what happens coming up in January. With elections going on, there's a recall for one of those guys. And who knows what's going to happen in the change of the board and what can be discussed coming forward on that. And I know that this 8.06 was originally a cannabis thing. That's correct, absolutely correct, from what I hear. So this all will be coming up again. Right, Gary? Thank you.
Hello, board. It's been a while since I've seen you. I apologize before for coming in about the air conditioning. I was just baking out there, and I was trying to write, and I didn't have much time to prepare for this, so I haven't even read all through it. I was working all weekend and everything, so I apologize for being so unorganized, but let me try to say a few things here. The way that this was explained today really shows how out of touch that our county government is with the people who live here and how it actually has been in the history of our county. This problem is not new. It's been here for a very long time. And one thing about that I was really surprised to hear statistically about lower income people is they actually pay their debts. They pay their debts a lot more than high income people. Higher income people are the people that are always looking for the loopholes. So if you're looking for unpermitted things, unpermitted structures, go into the expensive subdivisions and look for decks and look for buildings in their backyards, because they're the ones that do it the most and they're the ones that get away with it the most. We do it out of pure necessity, and as soon as we have enough money to be able to have a permitted structure, it's the first thing we do. We want it because we want to improve our lives. My family moved to Tuolumne County in about 1979. My father was a construction worker. There was plenty of construction there for us. He raised a good family there, worked prevailing wage, built bridges, built banks, built schools.
It's really hard. By the time he retired, he didn't even have much retirement, after building the county around him. So it's sad to watch a county spike, in growth and then go down and then kind of, grow into that. I moved out here about a decade ago, and I've raised my family in the Tri-County area. 2 of my kids have recently become adults. Both of them have chosen to move as far away as they can to find more opportunity. My daughter had to graduate a year early from school because of the Butte fire. She felt, compelled to do so. We didn't have a place. We were in a FEMA trailer, so she, moved without a car to Columbia College, got all the financial aid she could get, and struggled and struggled and struggled. We were finally just recently able to buy her a car, and we still don't have a foundation, okay? We got our property cleaned up like everybody else. I almost brought the bucket here today of the trash that they packed into where my house was. And so the first thing I had to do after it was clean up. And we did it by hand. I graded my pad with my own 2 hands when I first got there, 36 by 40 area with our own 2 hands and shovels, and picked rocks out ourselves, my family, my kids. That was the beginning of us getting there, so we could move a temporary structure there and start building a house.
Thank you.
And that's where we're at now.
Hi there. So I'm familiar with the language of the revision, and I'm not going to cite chapter and verse to enumerate the problems. I only get 3 minutes. That'd take all day. Staff can assure us all day long that these rules are in the hands of nice people who only want to help us. Claims about the intent of an ordinance and the temperaments of those enforcing it is irrelevant and misleading to the conversation. The level of discretion this gives to code enforcement is really problematic. When you guys vote, you're not adopting their assurances. You're adopting all the devils in the details of the actual verbiage contained in there. And then we've got to live with your decisions no matter how poor. The language of the ordinance is naked in its disregard for the well-being of the most vulnerable. It shows a total lack of consideration, if not contempt, for the people it claims to serve. There isn't enough lipstick in the world to pretty up this pig. No matter the spin, this is a stinker. 806 claims to be about a uniform approach to application of the code, and people are being told, but it won't affect you. This is just to go after growers, and that may well be the intent. I mean, after all, code said to fund their department, they're going to penalize 300 growers and 3 other code violations. Well, some board members nodded their heads approvingly. That's a 100-to-1 ratio. Selective enforcement doesn't get much more transparent than that. And I want to know who in county government those 3 non-growers offended. You're going to have a hard time pretending they aren't targeted hits, too. The potential for unintended consequences is almost unlimited here. The staff who were hired under the UO, I feel your pain. I lost my livelihood to the same board who eliminated funding for your salaries. And I'll see your pain and raise you a huge capital investment. Unless you hired on with the understanding that your job was temporary and would end along with the UO, you guys were baited and switched just like the growers that paid your salaries. 806 is like a platoon of Trojans without a horse to hide in, and it can't be unseen. Thank you.
Hi, Board. Trevor Whitkey. I've got a lot to get through, so I'm going to read very quickly. Whereas to reduce and eventually eliminate the need to subsidize from the general fund through a reduction or through introduction of a fee schedule. You guys haven't introduced a fee schedule. Your resolution that you're going to adopt with this ordinance is not complete. It doesn't make any sense. You're not actually introducing a fee schedule. You might want to wait until you actually have your fee schedule to introduce before you bring up this issue. Next, the update to 8.06 is being proposed because, whereas the county is in need of repeal and replacement for purposes of clarity and uniformity, this ordinance provides neither. 8.06 create new fees, but we have no idea how much these fees will cost. 8.06 add 7 new defined public nuisances. We have no understanding of why these have been added. 8.06.430 fines shall be assessed for each citation issued under this chapter for same violation shall be as follows. A fine not exceeding $100 for the first violation. A fine not exceeding $200 for a second violation of the same ordinance within 1 year of the first violation. A fine not exceeding $500 for each violation of the same ordinance within 1 year of the first violation. By my interpretation, that's the second violation. So what is it? Is it $200 for the second violation? Is it $300 for the second violation? Is it $500? Is it $700? Is it $800? I don't know. The code's unclear. Are these fines cumulative? Are they singular? Doesn't say. It says elsewhere in the code that all penalties are cumulative. I read that to mean that all of those numbers can be added up. Second fine is $800? Wow, that's a big fine. That's a substantially larger fine than I believe was in the previous code, which was worded differently, or the existing code rather. Under the new 8.06, there are multiple tracks. There is the without prior notice track, summary notice track, the courtesy notice track, the admin citation track, multiple abatement tracks, numerous fees and fines, all of which may or may not be applied depending on variables at the discretion of the board official or the building official. I'd like a flow chart so that I can understand all of the different possible avenues that are created as a result of this. There is no clarity, there is no uniformity, there is no single standard that is going to be applied. It's all at the discretion of the building official. And we've all been told that you intend to apply it unfairly, that you're going to selectively enforce targeting 300 different pot growers and only 3 non-pot growers. The definitions of commercial cannabis activities, cannabis cultivation, and commercial cannabis activity as defined in this code make it so that growing 1 cannabis plant is commercial cannabis cultivation. That's how you've defined it. Go back and look at these definitions and rework them, because you've created an entire complete ban.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, board and staff. Thanks for taking the time to hear us all today. I'm Jack Norton, District 1. I'm with the Calaveras Planning Coalition. And on behalf of the CPC, I'd like to say we support the concerns raised by our member Colleen Platt and sent to the board in her letter. In addition, I'd like to just bring up a few other points. Best practice when you're implementing any type of enforcement program is to have written policies and procedures. These would detail the roles and responsibilities of the officials, under what circumstances various enforcement actions are warranted, and circumstances where enhanced immediate enforcement actions are necessary. Code enforcement's discretion to treat 6 or less cannabis plants to expedited enforcement is an example of this, a situation like that. So it would be typical for these best practices to have an enforcement manual that incorporates these policies, and this manual would be in place prior to starting an enforcement program. It would be a public document that's available. And so I would ask, does such an enforcement manual exist? Also like to bring up that I've heard the argument made that taxes shouldn't pay for code compliance officers because the public shouldn't have to cover the costs of bad behavior. If you took that to its logical conclusion, that would mean the public shouldn't have to pay for police either, or they shouldn't have to pay for really just about any service protecting health and safety. The Constitution was brought up a couple times today, and I'd like to point out that part of the 8.06 is that, and I'm quoting, the administrative hearing officer has no power to declare a statute or ordinance unenforceable or refuse to enforce a statute on the basis of it being unconstitutional, which, to put it plainly, would mean that that hearing officer who's in charge of your appeal can't use the Constitution to protect you. That doesn't sound very American at all. I'd like to add the public is confused. We see that today. They need more time for input. And that county employees paying their own salaries by levying fines is a conflict of interest. Thank you all for your time.
Any other public comments?
Sue Hoper, currently living in the burn scar in my trailer, which I now realize is out of compliance, so come and get me. My nearest neighbors have put their place up for sale because they can no longer afford to be there because they came to grow marijuana. They were great neighbors. If somebody comes to buy that piece of property, and it's the kind of person I would want to have as a neighbor, in good conscience, I would say, if you adopt this thing, don't buy here. You would be crazy to buy here. I want you for a neighbor, but I can't advise you to come here because you will get screwed. And if it was somebody who didn't give a shit, who this could apply to, I don't want them for neighbors. So I could not advise anybody to come and buy in Calaveras County right now or to build here. It's not a wise investment. And I have been waiting to see who my neighbors would be before I start building. And now, if I'm not building, I am out of compliance. So what am I to do? You are putting people in an untenable position. And you are also would be putting the people who are enforcing the codes in an untenable position, because they would be in the position where supposedly they are trying to protect our health and safety, but in fact, the purpose of what they do day in and day out would be to try to pull in as much money as possible for their own economic security, because they won't have jobs as the depression of this county continues.
Any other public comment?
Joanna Ottman, Sheep Ranch. First, I just want to express how impressed I am with the amount of work people have done to try to understand this in just the last few days. Most of us didn't know anything about this ordinance. I read that it was on the website of the building department, and when in my life would I ever have thought, oh gee, maybe I should just look at the website of the building department to see what's going on. I mean, it wouldn't happen. So that's not public outreach. A lot of people have said some really intelligent, informed things, and I think it takes a lot of courage to stand up here in this kind of a situation and try to make sense out of this. So what I'm going to do is just ask some really basic questions. What was the impetus for this? It looks to me like what I read was there were 5 code compliance officers and 2 independent contractors, and they were hired because we had an ordinance to monitor. We don't have that now. So my basic question is, why are we trying to afford compliance people that we no longer need? And the second question that came up in my mind, because I'm aware that the definition of independent contractor has really changed. You can only hire somebody as an independent contractor if they are doing something that business doesn't itself do. For instance, I'm a massage therapist and I work sometimes at a bed and breakfast inn. They can hire me as an independent contractor because I'm providing a service that they don't provide. But if I was running a massage business, I could not employ another massage therapist as an independent contractor because they're providing the same service I am. So my question is, what are these independent contractors that's part of who we're trying to pay? What are they even doing? Is it really a distinct, different function? Because legally, if they're doing the same code enforcement, they can't be independent contractors. That's sort of a in the weeds type of question. But my basic question is, why are we trying to pay all the people that we no longer need because of the ban? I don't know where that idea came from. And I just think there's something fundamentally wrong with having people whose salary depends on coming to ordinary citizens to extract fees for their own salaries. I mean, that can't be right. That's wrong. Thank you.
Any other public comments? Seeing none, I'll close public comments.
Chair, before
Bring it
we
back to the board.
before we get into any discussion, could we take a break?
Sure, we take a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
All right, we're back from recess, and I'll bring it back in. Mr. Short, your team, Ethan, Sabrina, you have answers to some. I know we've been.
May I make some comments, try to address some of them?
Well, we've had a long 3 hours here of public comment, but there were some questions that need to be answered or brought up.
I'll try to address them as. Okay. I'll try to address the comments as quickly as possible, and more in a global way, more from an educational point of view. I think what I'm hearing today, which I really appreciate all the comments from the public, well received. I really enjoyed the feedback, but I think the process there is to really understand what code enforcement does. And the 8.06 is really if you read the title, it's a maintenance and it's a procedure. It is a clearinghouse really of all the other codes. If you read the first statement, it is the Title 15 to 17. So most of the stuff that I heard today are zoning code regulations, fire code regulations, 4290, 4209 SR fire regulations. Those are all independent state and standards that are adopted by other bodies. And so we, as a code enforcement agency, we have to go out and enforce and regulate these other standards that are related to public nuisance and health and safety. And a lot of the things out there are sometimes very hazardous and are life-threatening to our community. So most of the things that I heard here, like taking property rights, I think Ethan explained earlier, a lot of the property rights it is constitutional. A lot of this code is already been established. It's been being used in the old 8.06. It's what code enforcement does every day. It continues to be the same process. Also the comments are related to containers, which is really a building code and fire code issue, which is separate from 8.06. We did attempt to create a policy that has been posted on our website and has been communicated out to as much as people as possible, but foundations are not required on residential accessory structures. You can go out to our website, look at it. If anybody has any questions about it, they can contact me directly and I can explain it. But it's very, I believe that it's very friendly to the community, and it also the intent is to eliminate any potential hazards and life safety issues, as our code enforcement officers have seen quite dangerous situations out there, and so they're trying to eliminate those potential hazards. Thank you for that. As far as I've heard some issues about the fee study, yes, the fee study is going to be tentatively set up for August 14th, where the consultant, MGT, is working on that. Some of the questions I heard tonight are fees interrelated with permit fees. The board is going to have to deliberate in public and deliberate on the hearings coming up. Would have to have, it takes a 60-day, 2 hearings. But one of the issues is 25% of the permit fees going to help subsidize and help code enforcement. So those are some of the decisions that will be presented in those fee studies, and I think the public will have an opportunity time to really get a clear understanding how fees do work in a nexus study as it's been talked about. So I think this will all come together as the costs are for the fees that we're talking about here are the actual costs. So it's just to offset, as Ethan stated, government code allows for offsetting at least the actual costs for doing the services. So again, this ordinance is really trying to bring it together to provide our code enforcement officers the tools to get the enforcement in a comprehensive manner that's the most efficient, effective way to lower the costs in the encroachment to the general fund. Our intent and our goal is to try to create a user fee, not a tax, because that's what the fees are. They're a flat fee. It's a user fee, which is different from a tax, and that we were going to try to minimize that, and really the violators or the folks that have violations that just ignore the due process, which is a very friendly process because we have the courtesy process, which allows people to amply, if in good faith, are doing things. Our whole intent is to find compliance, not to collect fines, not to do quotas, not to do any of those things. We are trying to create a friendly approach to find compliance that will eliminate the life safety and health hazards that we are noticing out there based on the whole clearinghouse of all the codes. Well, this is...
We're at board level here.
And also the other comments about the Butte Fire and everybody, we're not going after any of the Butte Fire victims. We're very sensitive to the Butte Fire victims. We try to work with them in every aspect. Our officers are very friendly. That again, on the trailer or illegal camping or anything like that, that's a zoning regulation that would be need to talk up with our planning director. And the extensions of times that we're talking about, I think the board is deliberating on that. So all these other things that we're talking about, I just want to try to have the understanding 8.06 is more of a procedural code, and it's not a code. It's not a codified code in itself like the standards that we're talking about today. And hopefully I'm trying to summarize that a little bit, and I'm open up for the board's deliberation on the decision and giving staff direction.
Ethan, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. I just wanted to make sure that Ed's comments were clear that, for example, the trailer issue and the cargo container issue, those issues exist in different titles of the code, in Title 17 and Title 15. Nothing about 8.06 changes anything about trailers or anything really. It's just like Ed said, it's an enforcement process. There's a few things I heard said. Code enforcement has no independent contractors. Just thought I'd clarify that. Someone raised an issue about the powers of the administrative hearing officers and them being unable to declare a statute unconstitutional. That comes from Title III of the California Constitution. It's only Superior Court judges and appellate court judges can declare statutes unconstitutional. That language came verbatim from the California Constitution. The light pollution, someone raised light pollution. Light pollution, we don't have a comprehensive night skies ordinance, but light pollution is a zoning violation and exists in many sections of Title 17 in virtually every zone. So in order to enforce light pollution standards, we just put it all, consolidated it. That's all in Title 17. That's not a new rule from 8.06. Someone made a comment about code enforcement flying in helicopters. That's the Sheriff's Department. There's a... did someone? Oh, I heard someone ask about drones. No, there's no drones. There's currently controversy in the county council world about whether or not drones can be used for code enforcement, and the general consensus is no. And drones can only be used by the Sheriff's Department with search warrants, and are generally part of a tactical operation, not for surveillance. Oh, summary abatement. An individual read our summary abatement section. That's boilerplate language that can be found in every single municipal or county code. It is unequivocally the case that every code enforcement officer in the country has the power to engage in summary abatements without notice. That language that was read out loud from the code is virtually identical to language that we found in every single municipal or county code in the state of California. And life safety issues, again, it has to be an imminent life safety issue in order to be able to do a summary abatement. And I'd be happy beyond that to take any board questions that may have resulted from public comments or any of your own questions.
That was addressed regarding the 300 cannabis citations versus the 3 per officer county or non-regular code abatements. Citations are not abatements. Last year we issued 228 cannabis citations. We performed 14 abatements. Last year we were only able to perform 1 regular code enforcement abatement because we only had 1 officer enforcing regular code. Everyone else was focused on cannabis. This year we hope to increase that because there are nuisances out there that need to be abated by the county.
It's board level. Is there board questions? Supervisor Garamendi.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the public. It was some of the best public comment I've heard here in 18 months, and there were some excellent points that were brought forward to this board that many of them I hadn't contemplated before. So thank you all very much for all your research. It was excellent. However, just want to make sure, we're not going to see this fee schedule until August, right? So, and then 60 days. So the earliest, if we approve that fee schedule, we would start collecting those fees would be after Halloween, roughly.
Correct.
What if this board approves this 8.06 but does not approve the fee schedule? What have we done? It's not funny.
I'm sorry, that's like having a car with no gas.
Be a car with no gas, so we would have literally just screwed everything up.
Yeah.
Right, and so, and we haven't seen, pardon me? I'm sorry, and so we have so we would have screwed everything up. We don't know what these fee schedules are going to be. We don't know, so I'm wondering if this is ripe for action would be my first concern to the board, or whether this is something we should, obviously there's concerns from the public to get more input. There's concerns about what this means if we don't approve the fees. We don't know what the heck we're approving. We're talking about reasonable costs. So this may not be right. The second question I've got is this our policy to be strictly complaint driven, correct? I've got, just tell me where we're at here.
For the most part, yes, but when an officer observes a life safety issue, they're not going to ignore it.
Okay. So let me ask you a question. What does it take to get a code enforcement warrant? Who signs off on that?
Superior Court judge.
Superior Court judge. So I'm reading through this stuff. There's a lot of it. A lot of it is really good stuff, but let me give a hypothetical scenario. I've got a political enemy who doesn't like what I'm doing on my property, doesn't like me. So they send in a complaint to you. You come to my gate and you want to do an inspection, and I say no. At that moment, the fees, according to this, begin to accumulate?
No.
No.
Have we observed the violation?
No.
Then no.
Okay, so they don't begin.
No.
So you come on my property. You cannot come on my property without a Superior Court judge's warrant.
We must be denied consent first. We will try to get consent before we come onto your property. If you deny us consent, we can seek an inspection warrant from a Superior Court judge. That means just to come on to observe the violation. At that time, you would be issued.
So you're, excuse me, I'm asking questions if that's
Board
okay.
level, we've heard all public comments.
Okay, so because we are authorizing under 8.06090, authorized to enter upon any property in a reasonable manner, which is, and then obviously it goes on to speak, if I deny you, you have to go get a warrant and then you could come. So I know you said this, but I got distracted a little bit. When do you start collecting the fee?
So depending on the severity of the violation and what risk it is to life and safety, you would, under the new code, be issued a courtesy notice. Informing you, educating you of why you're out of compliance and what steps you can take to obtain compliance.
What if you search my property and you do not find a violation?
Case is unfounded and closed.
Do you think you might feel, compelled after going through all that work to find something to collect fees to pay for the time?
I assure you we have enough work to do. We don't need to go.
Well, I know you've got plenty of
doing
work
that,
to do,
so no.
but you don't have
But
plenty of money to pay for it.
If we found violations on your property that existed, we would notice you.
So if someone said, I've got a shipping container out there, you've got to go inspect it, and you come out and you say, he doesn't have a shipping container, but he's got a chicken coop or any other structure, would you fine me on that? I mean, does this become a vehicle to try to generate income? I'm just trying to figure out how this all works. I think, like many people, it makes me pretty nervous.
When we go, let's say we have a complaint for junk cars, and we go and see they have an unpermitted deck, we will address both issues.
Yes, but if you obtain a warrant for a specific complaint on something, and you see some different violations, you're only there for that, what the warrant specifically says. Is that not correct?
I'll defer to council for that.
Thank you.
Typically, yeah, but if she's in whatever violation she happens to see from a lawful vantage point, it could potentially be.
But you would have to come back for that unless they agreed to let you look at that or whatever, because you're there specifically on a warrant for certain things. Is that correct?
Let's say I got a complaint on a shipping container and I went ahead and helped myself into his garage and found another violation. That would be extremely against the Fourth Amendment.
Yeah, well,
it wouldn't hold that.
Yeah, if
we would never do that. But
if she went on to the went on the property to look at a violation she was aware of, and she saw an illegal rental unit with a falling down deck, and that hadn't been occupied, she could definitely do something about that. She could cite that.
You know, as I was going through this, and Ethan, thank you for all the time you gave me yesterday and last night answering my questions, and I think you guys are very efficient, and I'm sure you've memorized the code, and there's nothing, maybe the process, but I know you guys know your business. I really had to think about this very hard because we've talked about this before. We spoke about the code enforcement back in April. We spoke about it in preliminary budget. My business mind goes, okay, yeah, we got to fill this gap and keep this going. And then, and then my Calaveras kid comes out and I said, wait a minute, let's think about what we're doing here. Are we doing, and public comment brought up this up a lot, are we doing harm? And we don't want to hurt people from our government. And obviously, in my district, there's a perception, if not a reality, that there's selective enforcement. There's a perception that you're going to come after people rebuilding. There's a lot of perceptions out there. In reality, we're going to have to, the data will tell us how that all works out. And so I'm very concerned about the unintended consequences of this ordinance. I trust the people that I'm looking at right here, but I don't know who's coming next. I don't know who's going to be wielding this awesome power, and it makes me nervous. One of the things, and then my next question to myself was, is this consistent with the character of our rural county? We are a rural county. I'd be hard pressed, perhaps not everybody on this board, but God knows there's a book. How big is the building code, Ed? A couple thousand pages? Fills up my room. Fills up your room. So you could pretty much find anything, any violation in there that you wanted if you really wanted to. So I worry about this. Is it suiting our character of our county? And I'm also worried because this isn't about cannabis. 8.06, as you've currently got it, gives you the tools to deal with cannabis. This is about everybody else. This is about everybody else. And they're all going to fall under this axe. And I think that while I believe your intentions are good, and I believe you're trying to do it, I'm worried about the unfettered power of our government stepping forward. We had the 4th of July last week, and I took, for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't in Calaveras County. I took my family on a little holiday, but we always read the Declaration of Independence. And, the fun part about this, once you get past the first paragraph, it becomes kind of a legal document of findings. And one of the findings about the king is that he has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. I mean, I wish Al was still here. You could probably find me one in the Constitution as well. So I just really have a concern about, is this within character of our county? And is this really what we want to do? And what are the future unintended consequences? First off, I don't think this is ripe for us to take up as a board, but now I'm questioning whether we should take it up at all.
Supervisor Garamendi, can you clarify which parts of the updated code concern you?
Certainly. In fact, I gave many of them to Ethan, but I don't have my notes with me.
The current 806?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't see really that there is an expansion of power. I mean, and additionally, there literally isn't. I mean, it's the exact same enforcement powers that they've always had. They're really no different. The primary difference of this 8.06 is the fees and the appeal process. There's literally no expansion of power. I mean, that is I don't know where this idea comes from. I mean, it is the language for entry upon property and so forth is identical to the former and is found throughout code compliance ordinances all over the place. The idea of this is, someone brought up, so where did these ideas come from? Where did these edits come from? This is the third public hearing on this document. The first one was before the Board of Supervisors. The second one that was a industry working group, which people rightfully criticized as being not well enough publicized. We actually expected a lot of people to show up, and less than 30 probably showed up. And the changes that are in the column here came from the first meeting and that second public meeting. And it would certainly not hurt us, because the fee schedule won't be adopted until August, to have more public hearings on this issue, because I think that many of the public concerns that were addressed today could really be explained away, like the ones concerned about summary abatement. That's a standard boilerplate language. The one concerned about the power of the hearing officer and the extent of his power, that comes from the California Constitution. The summary abatement comes from the government code. Fines and summary abatement also comes from the government code. These are all things that I could explain to people, and they would probably be a lot less worried about it if we just explained it to them.
Ethan, I do not question where this comes from or the ability on it. I'm sticking with the spirit. Is this what the people of Calaveras are about? And I understand there's the law and then there's the application of it. And there's discretion also. So my concern is this who we are? Is this what we want to be doing? Do we want to be sending letters out on everybody and this becoming, I'm worried about it.
This isn't, I don't know why we think this would result in increased enforcement activity. We only have one senior code enforcement officer and 3 code enforcement officers.
The reason is because we're funding this organization by it. So if we don't increase the income or maintain the income, how do we maintain this program? And this is what it's designed for, and it's not bad. That's what the board directed. But I'm just questioning. I think we're disagreeing about the use of power and how it could be used.
Well, I mean, do we have code enforcement or don't we have code enforcement? I mean,
that is a question, and that has not been, and this is what we're debating.
Yeah.
Supervisor Olivero, your light's on?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a tendency to agree with Supervisor Garamendi, but I have some issues that I'd like to bring up, and maybe you can provide some answers for me, or at least some procedures. And I have to go back to my first comment on this particular agenda item. It is the appeal process. I guarantee you, ladies and gentlemen, if you go to the hearing officer and you appeal it to a superior court, that judge is going to interpret the law as it applies to that individual case. There's a thing about the law, and I'm not an attorney, thank God we have Ethan here, but I've been in several situations as a law enforcement officer. And the issue was brought up about, well, if I'm on your property legally and I see another incident or condition that's illegal, well, maybe you can explain the intent of a criminal act or an intent of an act. In other words, if I have a property and I have code compliance come on my property to do an inspection that I allow, or they have an administrative warrant or whatever, and they see something else, I may have not had knowledge that's even against the code. Is there some way to factor in the intent? Or is ignorance of the law, is that playing a big factor here? What I'm trying to get at is a fair, equitable situation for everybody.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, I want to take marijuana out of this because I have very deep concerns, and my constituent is sitting right there with the hat on, said a statement that happens in my district, and you're absolutely right, sir. There are construction buildings there that have not been permitted, and they're owned by rich people.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, and I know that. I've been addressing that for the last 4 years, and I intend to try to do that in the next 4 years. But the bottom line is, you're absolutely right. So my position is, If you're going to enact 8.06, you do it fairly for all the people, for all the crimes, in all the situations, not just cannabis. Now, I do feel that this is cannabis-driven. I had the opportunity and to go and sit on the boards prior to this board. I was there, and I know exactly what happened. But ladies and gentlemen, you need code compliance. One of our constituents, or one of our people out there during public comment said, what would you do without code compliance? You think you got problems now. You need laws. You need laws to be interpreted fairly, but you need good laws. And we don't have all good laws. We got some bad laws. Some of the things I'm concerned about, and maybe we can address these. One of the problems I'm hearing from the folks out there, and even my own experiences, is a public awareness when we decided that we're going to make these 3 changes to 806. Granted, 30 people showed up. I think we probably could have done a better job. I'm not pointing a finger here. I'm making suggestive criticism that may help us. We should be looking at the public input on this. We should be looking at the individual situations. And we should be looking at what's going to work best for everybody. Now, we all know, and come on, your heart of hearts, folks, not everybody out here is a true, blue, legal, 100% citizen. Somewhere in our past or somewhere in our present future, we got a little darkness in our heart. We don't follow all the laws. And sometimes you get caught. But if we make the best attempt we can as a government, as a representative of you folks, to make sure that you understand the laws and make sure what you can and can't do, that's part of our job too. Not just finding you, not just tearing down your unpermitted buildings, not just abating your marijuana crop. We have a responsibility to each other. We need some type of code compliance, but we need to do it right. I'll be upfront. Biggest issue I have right now is the fee schedule. I don't know what the fee schedule is. And who controls that? Well, we don't know that yet. And I know we can go sit here and vote on the 806 agenda item without knowing the fee schedule, but I'll be quite honest, I'm not going to do that. Let's get all the information. Let's go in this with our eyes open. You've done a very fine job. Mr. Short, I've worked closely with you on several projects, including code abatement or including code compliance. Ethan, I've worked with you, and Sabrina, I've worked with you. You guys do a great job. Sometimes it goes unappreciated. But it's time to quit screwing around here. The last 3 years, you've destroyed any relationships we've had. Look at you. You're sitting on one side of the room and on the other side of the room. How do we get things done if we're not going to be able to sit next to each other and talk about things? So let's be fair about it. Now, having said that, I have a concern and Chair, I was concerned about some statements made about a conversation. I want to discuss that with you, not here in public, but I want to sit down and talk to you about that. I'm concerned about the transparency and if that has any merit to it. But the bottom line is, we can't keep going this direction. We just can't do it, folks. Thank you.
Supervisor Mills.
Yeah. Explain to everybody, just so we have a clarity, what is the purpose of the building code? Yeah, short version.
The health and safety code is paramount to protect the public and common good out there from life safety issues, health and safety issues. It's to protect the community from, things out there that could be dangerous and hazardous to the public. It really is a quality of life issue.
It's quality of life, and it doesn't just apply to the building code, it applies to the plumbing code, electric code, fire code. You can go through every code we have, and you have them codified in their separate sections within our code now. This has nothing to do with code. That's not what we're talking about here in my world. This is nothing more than establishing a process by which you are going to work through those codes.
That's correct.
The code's already there. So let's not talk about containers. Let's not talk about 4290.
Right.
Let's not talk about grading. That's a whole other area. What we're talking about is a process.
Correct.
Now, if the board wants to change the process to streamline and to make it simpler, as you have explained, then this is the method to do it.
Correct.
If the board doesn't want to have this method and you want to go down another track, that's for the board to decide.
Correct.
But as I see it here, the things that I'm thinking about, for instance, I'm going to give you an example. Sioux City, Iowa has lawn police. And they go out with a measuring tape and measure your lawn. And they fine you for anything over 3 inches.
Oh, my gosh.
Okay. There are others. Dublin. Everybody know the nuisance code violations in Dublin for painting your house the wrong color or parking your RV out on the street or having it within view? I mean, there's some real off-the-wall stuff out there amongst various cities. I'm speaking. Fire districts have fire marshals for that same reason. It's not just for the safety of the individuals within the property boundary itself, but also the safety of the individuals that are beyond it. And that has to do with insurance. And that insurance drives a lot of these code decisions.
Correct.
So in my world, as I've watched in my area, it's more the neighbor-on-neighbor conflicts that create or drive a lot of the complaint-driven code violations. And I would say a good majority of them in District 4 aren't even cannabis-related. Think on that for a while. So I am all in favor of what this is. I've read it multiple times. It, to me, is establishing a process. If you guys want to go back and revise codes, then we can talk about that at a different time. The rest of the board I'm talking about. But for me, this is a methodology that is not just is being proposed to work in Calaveras County, but this is the same methodology that's being used in many other counties in California right now.
Correct.
We're not making any adjustments or changes. We're not violating California law. We're not violating the Constitution. We can talk about all that all day long, but this is just straight out, how do you want to get it done? And I'm fully in support of what you're trying to get done here.
Best practices.
Supervisor Clapp, you have any comments? None? Hey, this is the board level. Hey, we sat here quietly. Now I'm going to speak. Some of the thunder, Ian speaking last, some of the comments that were said by other supervisors have echoed what I have written down here in some of the conversations I had with you, Ethan. But first I want to say, back in February when we instituted the 806, and it was driven towards cannabis, in the appeals that were going on and trying to reduce the amount of them and get them through quickly, that we voted to go the route that we went with the administrative hearings separately from the board. I had my concerns about it at the time, and I'll tell you why. Back in 2010, a measure came before this board that had to do with the Assessment Appeals Board. And at that time, this board sat as the Assessment Appeals Board. It came before the board, and we were asked to expand government, so to speak, in the fact that we would pull the board out of it and set up an appeals board separate So nothing came, no appeals came to this board. And it had been historically part of the board's duties since the beginning when it was established. And I was the dissenting vote on that, 4-1. It came, what the vote was. And in my opinion, on this, what we're doing is creating another layer of government. And we are taking another thing out of the hands of the board. We are the people that were elected by these people out here and people out there watching and all of Calaveras that voted to represent them. And we are removing that from us and giving it off to somebody else. And to me, that is not something that I would give up very easily. And now we are going to do this to all of it, not only the cannabis appeals, which is no longer, which is what part of the problem is here that we're discussing and wanting to go this route, is because the urgency ordinance is over and that's ended and those appeals have ended. So now we're going forward and we're trying to still maintain this arm of government, to which I do not agree with. And I've said that to staff. And I echoed that again this morning when I got to work, before any of this happened. I also echoed through staff that, and it was said in public and it was said here, that I think we are putting the cart in front of the horse here. We're being asked to approve an ordinance to which there is no fee schedule attached to it. So we're not looking at a whole ordinance because it's not going to be whole. It's not going to be whole until you have a fee ordinance that we can look at and see what it is establishing and what we're asking the public to pay and whether this board agrees on it. And it was brought up by Supervisor Garamendi that what happens if we say no, we don't want those fees. We'd have a car that we couldn't fill up. We have no funds to do that, to drive it. But the driving force behind what I, again, have to say is that we're taking this out of the board's hands, and I have a real problem with that because I was elected to do what I was elected to do, and this was part of it, hearing appeals from people that have code violations. It's also, you're going to say you're going to notice us. There's times we're supposed to, back in February or January of 2017, we asked this department to notice us on violations. And there's a lot of violations that we haven't seen. So there's nothing saying here that we're going to see it before it goes before this hearing board and it's out of our control. Then we get a complaint from our constituent, it's out of our hands. We're not be able to do our job, and that is a real problem. The other problem I have with what we're being asked to vote on today, and I'll read directly from the narrative, and I brought this up. Staff brought this ordinance forward on May 22nd, 2018, and after taking public comment, the Board of Supervisors asked the staff to undertake further outreach to the public on the ordinance and to bring the ordinance back before the board after having done so. The chief building official added a discussion of the repeal and replacement of Chapter 8.06 to the agenda of the June 4, 2018 Industry Working Group meeting. The Industry Working Group is open to any member of the public and is comprised of builders, engineers, architects, real estate professionals, property owners, and others who transact business in the county. The meeting and the agenda for the Industry Working Group meeting was posted on the building department website. I didn't even know about the meeting. I don't go to the building department website. So unless you knew it was on, you have to go to the building department website. There was no outreach. There was nothing said outreach to the public to get their input on this, which was directed. And I don't mean to issue in any way, shape, or form, but we needed to get this out there, and just posting it on the building department, I don't think very many people at all go unless they're looking to what it takes for a permit, the cost of a permit, because they're looking for a deck or looking, researching on where their permit process is now or whatever, even go to this website. I'm not so sure, even if we posted on the county website itself, how many people would even know then. I think some outreach needs to be done and notified that there's going to be a meeting specifically in maybe each district or somehow, and get the public out there and notify the newspapers that we are looking for input on this code. And I think that's what needs to be done at the public outreach level of this. As you saw today, there was a lot of public comments on just that, about not knowing that this was even here. And I know it came before the board before, and this was the direction we gave you. But I just have a real concern with the public outreach part of it and not having enough input for it. The other thing is, it was mentioned about courtesy notices. Regardless if we go forward with this exact replica of 806, the courtesy notices I think is a great idea, and we can still do that if we don't go down this road, or we make some changes on this, or even if we do go down this road because the rest of the board votes to go down this road. I think it's a great idea. I think that was great, and I think those notices, however they're made up, it has a slot on there to what district it is, and it's CC'd to the board member of that, representative of that district, that it would be a good thing for everybody involved. So, and those I think are my comments. So where do we go from here?
Chair, I appreciate what you have to say. I mean, I think those are some valid discussions, and I think Supervisor Garamendi has had some valid discussions as well. It's just a matter of where do we want to go with this, and how do we want to meld it in and make it work? I mean, if Supervisor Garamendi is thinking that it needs to be done in conjunction with the fee schedule so we can look at it as a whole package, I wouldn't object to that.
And during the time, I think it was brought up that there could be some more public outreach.
Well, and that's if we go district by district and get out in the public and have each supervisor in his district, as this is out in the public's view, if you want to go in that direction as a board, I wouldn't object to that either, because then it's an opportunity for us to, again, get a full connection with the constituents who'd be most affected by it.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
I would concur with that, because most districts are inherently different as this applies.
That's correct. That's correct.
I would personally, if we don't go that direction, I would personally hold a town hall meeting to explain that, because of the involvement that we realize in my district up in Arnold and Dorrington and Murphys and Doug Flat, and it's a totally different animal. I would support that.
Supervisor Clapp, your light's on?
Yeah, my feeling's always been the same. When we first started this conversation, I said I wouldn't advocate my position on this, and it's still the same way. I don't want to be cut out of the loop. If something happens, I want to know, and I even want it more so, that I want my signature on it. That way they know I was told. Because I just don't want that to be happening. I mean, and so that would be my position still.
So, we have a motion of some type that says to continue this till the fee schedule is complete. In the meantime, we go out to public comments and try and read public outreach to each district and get some input from the constituents.
And I also heard that there was two discussions, or two people that were discussing wanting to stay connected or in the process.
I'm heartfelt about that, and have been, and every time something comes before this board, even back then, taking something out of our hands and creating another level, it just does not sit right with me. I'm steadfast about that. We were elected to do this, and we were elected to represent the people, and any appeals should come to us for us to hear. That's part of our job, in my opinion. There's been many times in code violations that it is brought up, I think today, where if we're aware of it and we know what's going on and we can outreach, we can help some people. And if it comes back to us as appeal, they have the right to at least exhaust their administrative relief here at this level, at the board level, at the supervisor.
So the point is if we're aware of it and we, in essence, have a signing authority on it, that we might be able to engage, and I think you alluded to earlier an example where you were able to engage and bring various groups together. I wouldn't object to having a continuation of that discussion in the meantime, if that is something that's critical to this whole point.
So do we have a motion?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
For clarification, this is an action item on the agenda, and we will be moving to accept the language as documented. Is that right, County Council?
I mean, that's your choice, but what I'm hearing so far is that you don't want to take action on this item right now. You want to table it until the fee study is done and further outreach. Is that correct?
That would be
exactly.
That would be the motion, is to table it until the fee study is done with the direction of staff that they set up a town hall in each one of the districts to explain it and allow public input. And that there should be some way of putting us back into the discussion, as you had and Supervisor Clapp had stated. That would be my motion to do that.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and
want
a
a
second.
discussion?
Yeah, we want a discussion.
Just remember, Ben Franklin said those who give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. But if you want to come up to Mountain Ranch and do a town hall on this, welcome.
Yeah, you got to pay to come District 3.
So is that?
That's my comment.
It's just a comment. All right, let's vote. Call for a vote. I have a motion by Supervisor Mills and a second by Supervisor, or a motion by Supervisor Oliveira.
No.
Excuse me. Motion by Supervisor Mills and a second by Oliveira. Call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0.
So, Mr. Chair, that is for a date uncertain, not for...
That's for a date uncertain.
Okay,
We
thank
won't
you.
have apparently somewhere around August 14th, the fee schedule. Until we get the fee schedule complete and be able to look at it, then we'll have to put something together to bring back.
Thank you.
All right.
No.
All right,
Yeah, I'll
Madam
do it.
Clerk.
Supervisor announcements. In compliance with AB 1234, chaptered as Government Code Section 53232.3D, board members shall provide brief reports on meetings they attended at the expense of the local agency at the next regular meeting of the legislative body. This report is required to include meetings attended for which there has been expense reimbursement, such as mileage, meals, lodging, etc., but may also, at the board member's discretion, include any other meeting attended by the supervisor on behalf of the county.
We'll start with Supervisor Clapp. Your light's on.
Okay, I attended the CSA 1 in Valley Springs, and I attended the Good Morning Calaveras.
That's it?
It didn't cost you a dime this month.
Supervisor Mills.
I didn't cost you a dime yet either, but I will tomorrow. Fire Safe Council doing a project review last Thursday. There's 28 active fuel break projects in Cal. Okay, project review with the Foothill Fire Safe Council. Do we have to wait for everybody to leave? There's 28 active fuel breaks in Calaveras County, and the Foothill Fire Safe Council is doing a spectacular job in bringing in some additional funds to help the private citizens, as well as coordinate the public work between CAL FIRE and the U.S. Forest Service. Attended also Good Morning Calaveras. Kathy Giuliano is the presenter, and then did a personal tour of the Upper Stagecoach Bridge project, where we're converting a low water crossing into an actual bridge in Diamond 20. And that's all I have for now.
Supervisor Oliveira.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had the distinct honor and pleasure to attending the Arnold Independence Day Parade. But most importantly, I got the opportunity to meet a young man, 4 years old, named Julian. Unfortunately, Julian's mother and sister and Julian were involved in a car accident in in Arnold. They collided with a bear that resulted in the fatality of his mother. Julian shows remarkable courage. He's a pretty tough young boy. I hope things work out well for him. I also attended the Ebbets Pass Fire fundraising barbecue that same day. It was a busy day Saturday. And a lot of great people came out, a lot of folks, community supported that. That's their charity drive for the Ebbets Pass Firefighters Association. And I did attend the fireworks at Ironstone, and they put on one great fireworks show. I'll tell you, I think it was over an hour long, but very good event. And I'm Mr. Chair and Board and Madam Clerk, just will give some advance warning. I will not be at the next meeting for next Tuesday. I'll be in Nashville, Tennessee, representing Calaveras County at the NACO convention. That's something that gives us national voices and ears, and it's worked out very well, so I'll be there.
Supervisor Garamendi.
According to AB 1234, I have nothing to report.
And according to AB 1234, I have nothing to report either. Staff? Nothing to report. Madam Clerk, did we finish public comments this morning? No, we did not. Okay. So we will open to public comments.
Good afternoon again. The last meeting, it was brought up that you should not put the ban on the ballot until you saw how effective the ban was. And I got to thinking, did you ever ask what the ban, how effective it's been for your local businesses? Your brick and mortars, your moms and pops, the ones that have been around for 20, 30, 40 years. Have any of you gone to your local businesses and asked them, has it affected their bottom dollar? I did, and I won't even charge you. It was a pretty, it was a very laid-back survey. I went in as a business person myself and asked. And I will tell you, pretty soon there'll be a closed for business sign in Mountain Ranch. There's not going to be much. People are being cut back on their hours. That's less money to spend at their local stores. The couple of store cinders I know is just trying to keep their employees employed, but I don't know how, because again, I was in hardware the other day, and I was the only one. Not many in grocery either. The gas station is barely hanging on, and I spoke to the other businesses there, and they are struggling. I also went to Railroad Flat, and even though it's only one store, and pretty much is where they're going to go if they don't want to drive very far, it has experienced a slowdown, but not a great deal. I also went to McCallum Hill, and I spoke to multiple businesses there. Every one of them have experienced a slowdown. I also went to San Andres, and I've spoken to hardware stores, auto repair shops, mini marts, gas stations, restaurants, retail stores, pubs and bars, as well as even Carson Hill Mine, who does excavating. All of them, except I will say 90%, have experienced slowdowns, anywhere from 20, 30, 40% or more. How do you employ people? How do you pay your property tax if you don't have money coming in? How do you do donations? And you know what? Every single person I asked said they're going to have to cut back on donations to their local charities that our little county needs help with. Humane Society, Food Bank. They don't have the money. If they don't have the money, how do they help their friends and their families survive? These aren't just blow-away businesses. These are folks who've been a very, very long time. And here's another sad thing. People are leaving Calaveras County because of the choices that you have been making. People have lived here many, many, many generations. It's a sad thing, and I hope that you'll reconsider what you have done and reconsider the ban and ban the ban, and let us bring economy back to this county the way it should be by farmers that want to be a part of our economy and our community. They are not evil. They're good people. We want the illegals out of here, and there's no way you're going to do it without having the good folk here helping our economy and helping our tax base.
Cliff Edson, San Andreas. So I'm just going to follow up on that a little bit. We're making a choice to leave our business as our choice. It's not that our business is doing terribly, although it's down about 40% over last year. But we've been through it before in 2008. And I think Chair Tofinelli was on the board back in 2008 when the national economy took a beating. And we took a beating here in Calaveras County. We actually never recovered from it until about 4 years ago. And so, and now what we're seeing is the same thing, only it's locally created. It seems like in a lot of places in the country, the economy's good, but here it is terrible. It's dismal. And not for every business. You take Senders down in Valley Springs, I think they're doing very well. But, I'm glad they're doing very well because their store up in Mountain Ranch is not doing well. People have to do things like check out their insurances now and reduce their insurance policies and look for better and cheaper ways of doing health insurance. So they're going to start charging more health insurance to their employees and things like that. That's what happens when you have to start cutting back and you're trying not to get rid of people. But eventually it affects everybody. And so, I hate to keep banging on you guys about your choices, but you know what? You guys made the choices. So I don't agree with them. And I'm sorry that we have to go through this. Our little business was there 13 years, and it wasn't much, but it kept us alive. It kept us working, kept quite a few people working over the years, actually, and now it will be gone by the end of the year. And so, people could sit there and say, oh, gee, that's too bad. And that's exactly what happens. Oh, gee, that's too bad, and then they move on to the next subject. But for families, it's tremendous. And there's a lot of families that are being affected now. I've been to many of the businesses, as previously mentioned, and the number that I'm hearing mostly is 40% reduction in business. Now, what you did was you took away something, but you didn't replace it with something. You didn't replace it with anything. And that will take years to do. So, if you give a crap about your people, you might want to consider what you've done to them. Thank you.
I'm Lucinda, and I own a small garden store in Mountain Ranch. It's called All Seasons Topsoil and Compost. And as a business owner in Mountain Ranch, I'm here to share the impact of what the ban has had on my business. Before the ban, my business was 19% of last year's sales. Since the ban, my business has decreased to 11%, and it's going down every day. Because of that, I'm really uncertain of the continuation of that business. I'll need to lay off an employee, which is one more job added to the multitudes of job loss here in Calaveras County. I'm a member of the Mountain Ranch Garden Club. I'm also a master gardener. I've shared many times with the members to consider this. Our young people have gone through college. Many have come out with large student loans, only to discover that there are no jobs. Many of these young folks have gone back to what our grandparents did and that was farming and working the land. They have moved to the country, they're raising their families like our grandparents did, working the land and trying to make a decent living. Now that's been taken away from them. And some of them are very honest, decent folks because I work with them all the time. I want to conclude with this, that alcohol hasn't gone away, tobacco hasn't gone away, and marijuana is not going to go away. Don't shut our community down with arrogant ideas. Please help us to stay intact and not become a ghost town.
We're going to take a break right now. The DVD is about to run out. Susan needs to change the DVD. So we take 5 minutes to allow her to do that.